In the grim darkness of the far future, where war is the only constant and mercy is a forgotten dream, there exist moments of such profound tragedy that even the endless grinding of galactic warfare must pause to acknowledge them. Imagine a warrior entombed in adamantium and ceramite, sealed away from the universe for 3,000 years. Imagine that warrior awakening not to the faces of brothers, not to the familiar litanies of his chapter, but to the brutal, grinning visages of the galaxy's most destructive Xenos race. This is the story of what happens when Orks discover a dreadnought that has been sleeping since before their great-great-grandsquigs were even spores in the ground. The Imperium of man creates many monuments to sacrifice, but few are as haunting as the Dreadnought. These towering war machines stand between 3 and 5 meters tall, their armored shells housing the broken remnants of Space Marine heroes too valuable to let die, yet too damaged to ever truly live again. Inside the sarcophagus, at a Dreadnought's heart, floats what remains of a once mighty warrior, his body reduced to little more than a torso, vital organs, and a brain suspended in thick amniotic fluid. Neural interface cables pierce what's left of his flesh, linking his consciousness directly to the weapons and sensors of his new adamantium body. To be interred within a dreadnought is considered the highest honor by many Space Marine chapters. It is also, without question, a fate that hovers somewhere between salvation and damnation. And the Orks, they are the galaxy's ultimate scavengers, raiders who live for the thrill of battle and the joy of looting everything that isn't nailed down. And quite a bit that is. They are a race of hulking, green-skinned fungal humanoids who combine savage brutality with an almost instinctive understanding of technology that should by all rights be far beyond their comprehension. Where other races see sacred relics or carefully maintained equipment, Orks see interesting bits to nick, shiny things to claim, and most importantly, new toys to play with. The collision of these two forces, the ancient entombed warrior and the perpetually gleeful Xenos looters, creates scenarios that range from darkly comedic to outright catastrophic. To understand what happens when these two elements meet, we must first understand both the nature of the dreadnought and the peculiar character of Orkoid civilization. We must explore the depths of stasis sleep that can stretch across millennia, and we must comprehend the unique way Orks interact with technology that was never meant for their clumsy, yet surprisingly effective, manipulations. This is a story that unfolds across 3,000 years of silence and then erupts into violent chaos in mere moments. It is a story that speaks to the fundamental tragedy at the heart of the Warhammer 40,000 universe, that even death itself offers no escape from duty, and that the galaxy's cruelty extends even to those who have already given everything. The Walking Tombs, understanding the Dreadnought. Before we can appreciate the horror and absurdity of Orks discovering an ancient dreadnought, we must first understand what these machines truly are. They are not simply weapons platforms or armored vehicles. They are walking sepulchres, mobile graves that house warriors who exist in a state between life and death, consciousness and oblivion. The process of becoming a dreadnought begins with catastrophic injury. A Space Marine must be wounded so severely that even the superhuman healing capabilities of his enhanced physiology, combined with the skills of the chapter's apothecaries, cannot restore him to combat readiness. We're not talking about lost limbs here. Those can be replaced with bionic augments that function as well or better than the originals. No. To qualify for internment, a Space Marine's injuries must be so severe that his body is essentially destroyed, with only his vital organs and brain remaining viable. Perhaps he was caught in the heart of a plasma detonation, his armor melted and his flesh charred beyond recognition. Perhaps he was crushed beneath a Titan's footfall, his skeleton shattered into fragments. Perhaps he fell from orbit without a working jump pack, or was caught in the blast radius of a cyclonic torpedo. Whatever the cause, the result is the same. The Marine is brought back to his chapter's fortress monastery, his gene seed harvested for the future, and his broken body placed into the armored sarcophagus that will become his new form. Tech priests and tech marines perform the delicate and dangerous procedure of connecting what remains of his nervous system to the Dreadnought's machine spirit. Neural interface cables are threaded through his brain tissue. Sensory inputs are rerouted from eyes that no longer exist to optical sensors mounted in the Dreadnought's hull. The warrior's sense of touch is rewired to pressure sensors distributed across tons of ceramite armor. His voice, once produced by lungs and vocal cords, now emerges as synthesized audio from Vox speakers, a crackling mechanical approximation of his former speech. The experience of inhabiting a Dreadnought is reportedly nightmarish, at least initially. Imagine awakening to discover that you can no longer feel your fingers because you no longer have fingers. Instead, you have weapon mounts capable of leveling buildings. Imagine breathing amniotic fluid instead of air, the thick, oily substance filling your lungs with each mechanical respiration. Imagine that every sensation you experience is filtered through layers of machinery and interpretation, that you perceive the world not directly, but through data feeds and sensor arrays. Some newly interred warriors go mad from this initial shock, their minds unable to process the fundamental wrongness of their new existence. Those who survive the transition often describe it as drowning while simultaneously being reborn, their identity fragmenting and reforming around the cold certainty of their new mechanical body. But Space Marines are not ordinary men. They are warriors conditioned from childhood to endure the unendurable, to function under conditions that would break lesser beings. Most who are interred within Dreadnoughts eventually adapt to their new existence, learning to interpret sensor data as naturally as they once processed sight and sound, to move their massive adamantium limbs with the same precision they once commanded their flesh. They become weapons in the truest sense, walking engines of destruction that combine centuries of combat experience with firepower that can rival that of an armored vehicle. Yet this existence takes a terrible toll. The extended neural interface required to pilot a Dreadnought causes immense mental stress. Pilots report lethargy, confusion, dyschronometria, the inability to accurately perceive the passage of time, and in extreme cases, senility. The longer a warrior remains active within his Dreadnought shell, the more his mind erodes, worn away by the constant strain of maintaining a cybernetic connection to tons of machinery. This is why, when not actively deployed in battle, Dreadnoughts are returned to their chapter's halls of remembrance and placed in stasis. Stasis sleep is a mercy and a curse. The warrior's consciousness is essentially suspended, frozen in a state that's neither truly awake nor genuinely asleep. Time passes, but the pilot experiences none of it. He closes his optical sensors on one battlefield and opens them on another, sometimes decades or centuries later, with no awareness of the interval between. To the Dreadnought pilot, each awakening feels immediate, as if no time has passed at all. But the galaxy around him tells a different story. Battle brothers he fought beside are dead and buried. The chapter master who commanded him has been succeeded by warriors who see the Dreadnought as a relic from ancient history. The very political landscape of the Imperium may have shifted in ways the ancient cannot immediately comprehend. This is the standard cycle of existence for a Dreadnought: awakening for battle, fighting with the fury of a warrior who knows his time is limited, then returning to stasis sleep until the next crisis demands his activation. Some of the oldest Dreadnoughts have been repeating this cycle for thousands of years. Bjorn, the fell-handed of the Space Wolves chapter, has been interred for over 10,000 years, having fought during both the Great Crusade and the Horus Heresy itself. He is awakened only once every 1,000 years, or when his chapter faces threats so dire that they require the wisdom and fury of their most ancient warrior. Each time he wakes, the galaxy is a stranger place, filled with faces he doesn't recognize, fighting wars he doesn't immediately understand. The psychological impact of this existence cannot be overstated. Imagine watching everyone and everything you ever knew crumble to dust while you remain locked in your adamantium prison. Imagine the loneliness of being the only one who remembers battles that have passed into myth, who can speak with authority about events that current generations know only through historical records. Imagine the slow, creeping realization that you are becoming less human with each passing century, that your memories of life before interment grow hazier with each awakening, that the machine is slowly consuming what remains of the man. Some dreadnoughts maintain their sanity through sheer force of will, clinging to their humanity and their sense of duty, even as the centuries pile up around them. Others descend into madness, their personalities fragmenting under the weight of endless violence and isolation. The Space Wolves have Murderfang, a dreadnought who has gone completely feral, driven by uncontrollable rage. He is awakened only when the chapter needs pure, unthinking violence unleashed upon their enemies, and is immediately returned to stasis before he can turn on his own brothers. The Blood Angels have their Death Company dreadnoughts, warriors who have succumbed to the Black Rage and now fight only in the delusional belief that they are Sanguinius himself, battling Horus during the final moments of the heresy. For the Chaos Space Marines, who lack the technology to properly maintain their dreadnoughts or place them in stasis, the situation is even worse. Chaos dreadnoughts remain active for centuries or even millennia, their pilots slowly going insane from the isolation and the corrupting influence of the warp. Many degenerate into hellbrutes, their flesh fusing with their mechanical shell until the whole construction seems made of demonic meat and screaming metal. For the traitor legions, internment in a dreadnought is not an honor but a punishment, a fate reserved for those who have displeased their lords but are too valuable to simply execute. This, then, is what a dreadnought is. It is a weapon, yes, and a formidable one, but it is also a prison, a life support system, and a tomb. It is the Imperium's absolute commitment to the principle that even death does not release a warrior from his duty. And when such a warrior is forgotten, left to sleep for 3,000 years in some abandoned fortress or lost battlefield, the tragedy becomes almost unbearable to contemplate. 3 millennia of silence, the lost ancient. For a dreadnought to sleep for 3,000 years undisturbed requires a confluence of tragic circumstances. Space Marine chapters are nothing if not meticulous in their record-keeping and the maintenance of their sacred relics. Every dreadnought is a treasure beyond price, a repository of tactical knowledge and combat experience that extends back centuries or even millennia. Chapters go to extraordinary lengths to recover their dreadnoughts from battlefields, even in the face of overwhelming enemy fire. To lose one permanently is considered a catastrophe. So, how does it happen? The most common scenario involves the complete destruction of a chapter. The Imperium has stood for 10,000 years, and in that time, countless Space Marine chapters have been founded, fought, and fallen. Some meet their end on the battlefield, overwhelmed by Xenos hordes or chaos invasions that leave no survivors. Others fall to more insidious threats, corruption from within, catastrophic mechanical failures, or simple bad luck in the wrong place at the wrong time. When a chapter falls, its records die with it. The locations of outposts, the deployment of forces, the resting places of honored dreadnoughts, all of this information can be lost in an instant. Imagine a chapter fighting a desperate last stand on their homeworld. The enemy, perhaps Tyranids consuming everything in their path, has broken through the outer defenses. The chapter master makes the agonizing decision to evacuate what gene seed can be saved, to preserve the chapter's legacy even if the current generation must die. In the chaos of the evacuation, in the desperate scramble to save what can be saved, a dreadnought is left behind. Perhaps he was in stasis in a sub-level vault that the evacuation teams simply didn't have time to reach. Perhaps the tech priests, who knew his location, were killed before they could relay the information. Perhaps he was already considered lost, his stasis vault having been cut off from the rest of the fortress when a section of the structure collapsed during the siege. The evacuation ships flee into the void. The Tyranids consume the planet, stripping it of all biological matter, leaving behind only bare rock and the ruins of what once stood proud. And deep beneath the rubble, in a stasis vault powered by plasma coils designed to function for 10,000 years or more, a Dreadnought sleeps on, unaware that his chapter is scattered across the stars, that his homeworld has been rendered a lifeless husk, that he has been forgotten. Or consider a different scenario. A Dreadnought is deployed to a remote outpost, tasked with defending it against potential Xenos incursions. The outpost is located on a moon in an obscure system, a backwater that sees little traffic and less importance. The Dreadnought stands his watch for decades, then is returned to stasis when the threat level decreases. Years pass. The chapter that deployed him is called to fight in a distant sector, then another. Records of the outpost begin to gather dust in the chapter's archives, filed away under minor deployments and secondary concerns. A scribe makes an error in the filing system, and the outpost's location is mislabeled. Another scribe, trying to correct the error, accidentally deletes the entry entirely. Centuries pass. The chapter fights through a dozen major campaigns, loses and replaces entire companies of warriors. The homeworld's fortress monastery is renovated, its archives reorganized. In the shuffle, some records are lost. Others are damaged by moisture or fire. The few tech priests who remembered the outpost die, their knowledge passing with them. And on that distant moon, in a facility that has continued to function on automatic systems for 300 years, for 500, for 1,000, the Dreadnought sleeps in his stasis vault, maintained by machines that have long outlived any organic caretaker, waiting for an awakening that will never come. Or perhaps the scenario is more dramatic. A chapter is fighting a war that spans decades, a grinding conflict against chaos forces that refuse to break. Dreadnoughts are awakened in waves, their ancient wisdom and firepower desperately needed. One of them, a venerable warrior who has served for 2,000 years already, is deployed to hold a critical position. The battle goes catastrophically wrong. A warp storm erupts across the battlefield, reality itself warping and tearing. Space Marine forces are scattered across time and space. When the storm finally clears, most of the chapter's forces are accounted for, but the Dreadnought is not among them. Search parties are sent out, but the warp storm has transformed the landscape beyond recognition. What was once a fortress is now a twisted labyrinth of impossible geometry. What was once a plain is now a mountain range made of crystallized screams. The search parties find bodies, equipment, even other Dreadnoughts, but not the one they seek. After months of fruitless searching, he is declared lost, presumed destroyed. The chapter mourns his loss and moves on, as they must. Wars wait for no one, not even to properly honor the fallen. But the Dreadnought wasn't destroyed. He was transported, flung through the warp, to emerge on a different world entirely, his systems automatically entering emergency shutdown to preserve his life. His sarcophagus, designed to survive the most extreme conditions, held together through the transition. Emergency power kicked in, placing him in stasis to wait for recovery. But no recovery came because no one knew where to look, or even that there was anything to find. 3,000 years is an almost incomprehensible span of time. It is longer than recorded human history in the real world. It is time enough for empires to rise and fall, for languages to evolve beyond recognition, for continents to shift and mountains to erode. In the context of the Imperium, 3,000 years is still a relatively short period. The Imperium itself has endured for 10 millennia, but it's more than enough time for records to be lost, memories to fade, and forgotten equipment to be buried under layers of dust and neglect. For the Dreadnought in stasis, those 3,000 years pass in an instant. One moment he is fighting on some ancient battlefield, The next he will awaken to a galaxy that has moved on without him. His chapter may still exist, but if so, it has likely been rebuilt, reorganized, and rededicated to the point where he would barely recognize it. The Battle Brothers, he knew, are dead 1,000 times over. The enemies he fought are either extinct or evolved into new threats. The very tactics and doctrines he mastered may have been updated or replaced entirely. He is not just a man out of time, but a warrior who has missed 3 millennia of warfare, 3 millennia of changes to the galaxy's political and military landscape. But for all that time has passed outside his stasis vault, the Dreadnought himself has not changed. His weapons are 3,000 years out of date, yes, but that matters less than it might seem. The Imperium's technological stagnation means that a weapon from 3,000 years ago is likely identical to one manufactured yesterday, perhaps even superior, if it was crafted during a period when the chapter had access to better materials or more skilled artificers. His tactical knowledge, while ancient, is still fundamentally sound. War, especially in the 41st millennium, doesn't change as rapidly as technology might in other settings. What has changed is the galaxy around him. 3,000 years of war have reshuffled the political map. Empires that existed when he entered stasis have fallen. New threats have emerged from the darkness between the stars. The Great Rift has torn reality itself asunder, though depending on when our hypothetical Dreadnought entered stasis, this might be news to him or ancient history. Primarchs, believed lost or dead for 10,000 years, have begun to return. The Imperium itself teeters on the brink of collapse under the weight of 1,000 wars on 1,000 fronts. And through all of this, through 3,000 years of galactic upheaval, through the rise and fall of countless civilizations, through wars that consumed entire sectors and left nothing but dust in their wake, the Dreadnought has slept. His stasis vault, powered by plasma coils that were designed to last 10 millennia and built with the redundancy that only the Adeptus Mechanicus can achieve, has continued to function. Automatic maintenance systems, crude but effective, have kept the essential systems operational. The sarcophagus itself, a miracle of 30th millennium engineering, has preserved its occupant in perfect suspended animation. The facility around the stasis vault has not fared as well. 3,000 years of neglect have taken their toll. Walls have cracked and crumbled, ceiling sections have collapsed. Moisture has seeped in, causing rust and corrosion on any exposed metal. Dust has accumulated in thick layers on every surface. Vines and fungi have found their way inside, growing through cracks in the walls, slowly but inexorably reclaiming the structure for nature. Scavenger animals have made nests in corners. Small earthquakes or other seismic activity have shifted the structure, causing sections to lean at odd angles or settle into the earth. But deep in the heart of this decaying facility, in a vault specifically designed to withstand the collapse of the structure around it, the Dreadnought sleeps on, unaware, undisturbed, waiting for an awakening that his chapter believes will never come, because they believe he was destroyed 3,000 years ago, if they remember him at all, waiting for a rescue that will never arrive, because no one knows he's there to rescue. And then, one day, the Orks arrive. The Green Tide, Ork nature and the culture of looting. To understand what happens when Orks discover our ancient Dreadnought, we must first understand what Orks are and what drives them. They are not simply brutish warriors or mindless destroyers, though they are certainly both of those things. They are a species unlike any other in the galaxy, a biological enigma that combines animal characteristics with fungal reproduction, all wrapped in a culture that elevates violence to an art form and looting to a sacred calling. Orks are, at their core, a weapon race. They were engineered millions of years ago by the Old Ones, an ancient and incredibly advanced species that fought the war in heaven against the Necrons and their Satan masters. The Old Ones created the Orks, then called the Krork, to be the perfect soldiers. Massive, incredibly tough, capable of reproducing rapidly and possessing an instinctive understanding of technology that would allow them to fight effectively even without formal training or education. These ancient Krork were apparently more sophisticated than modern Orks, standing up to 12 meters tall in some cases and possessing technology that rivaled or exceeded that of the Imperium. But over the millions of years since the War in Heaven ended, the Krork have devolved into the Orks we know today, smaller, cruder, but no less dangerous for all that. Modern Orks are green-skinned humanoids that combine characteristics of animals and fungi in ways that should be biologically impossible, but somehow work. They reproduce through spores released when an Ork dies, or even just when an Ork is happy and excited, which, given that Orks are always either fighting or preparing to fight, is essentially all the time. These spores settle into soil and grow into first squigs, the simplified orkoid life forms that serve as food and attack beasts, then Gretchen, the smaller, more cowardly subspecies that serves as labor and cannon fodder, and finally into full Orks themselves. This means that Ork populations are almost impossible to eradicate completely. You can kill every Ork on a planet, burn their settlements to ash, sterilize the ground with plasma fire, and 5 years later, there will be a new Ork settlement springing up from spores that survived in the soil. It's been said that the only way to truly cleanse a planet of Ork infestation is exterminatus, the total destruction of all life on the world. And even then, you can't be completely certain that some spores didn't escape into space on a chunk of debris. Ork society, if it can be called that, is brutally simple. Might makes right. The biggest, strongest Ork is in charge, period. No elections, no deliberations, no democratic process, just violence and the threat of more violence. An Ork who wants to be in charge has to be big enough and mean enough to beat up anyone who disagrees, and he has to keep proving it because there's always another Ork looking to take his place. This creates a natural hierarchy where the largest Orks, called knobs or war bosses, command increasingly large groups of smaller Orks, who in turn push around the Gretchen, who do most of the actual labor. But size alone doesn't determine an Ork's role in society. Orks have what they call odd boys, individuals who are born with specialized knowledge encoded in their DNA. Mech boys have an instinctive understanding of technology. Pain boys understand medicine, or at least Orkish medicine, which mostly involves cutting bits off and bolting new bits on. Weird boys channel the psychic energy of the wag into devastating attacks, though it often drives them mad in the process. These odd boys are essential to Ork society, providing specialized skills that most Orks simply don't possess. The concept of the wag is central to understanding Ork behavior. On one level, a wag is simply a military campaign, a massive gathering of Orks who come together to fight a common enemy. But it's more than that. The wag is also a psychic phenomenon, a gestalt field generated by the collective unconscious of the Ork race. When Orks gather in large numbers, their psychic energy combines and amplifies, affecting reality itself in subtle but measurable ways. This is why Ork technology works, despite appearing to defy the laws of physics. A gun cobbled together from scrap metal, held together with spit and hope, will function reliably in Ork hands, because enough Orks believe it should work, and their collective psychic field makes that belief reality. This doesn't mean Ork technology is pure fantasy. Their weapons have actual functional components and operate on genuine principles, but the psychic field fills in the gaps, makes the improbable possible, and allows machinery that should catastrophically fail to instead function adequately. The whack field also allows Orks to instinctively recognize hierarchy. They can look at another Ork and just know whether that Ork is bigger and meaner than they are, whether they need to defer to him, or whether they can take him in a fight. This prevents constant infighting for dominance, except when the hierarchy becomes ambiguous, at which point a quick scrap settles the matter and everyone goes back to fighting the enemy instead of each other. And what do orcs fight for? The simple answer is, they fight because they enjoy it. Orcs live for combat. It's not a means to an end for them. It's the end itself. They don't conquer worlds because they want territory or resources, though they'll certainly take both. They don't raid Imperial shipping lanes for profit, though they'll loot everything they can carry. They fight because fighting is what they were designed to do, and they're happiest when they're doing it. But almost as important as fighting in orc culture is looting. Orcs are the galaxy's ultimate scavengers, and they'll steal anything that isn't nailed down, and plenty of things that are. This isn't simple kleptomania. It's a fundamental part of how orc society functions. Orcs have limited manufacturing capacity compared to the Imperium or other advanced civilizations. They can't mass-produce guns in automated factories or construct ships in vast orbital yards. What they can do is take things other races have made and repurpose them for orcish use. An orc warband that overruns an Imperial guard position will immediately begin looting the bodies and equipment. Lace guns become scrap metal for new weapons. Uniforms get torn up for bandages or decoration. Lehman Russ tanks are the most prized finds, quickly painted red because the red wounds go faster and pressed into service as looted wagons. The orcs will weld on additional armor, bolt on more guns, and generally improve the vehicle according to orcish aesthetics, which favor spikes, flames, and as much dakka as can physically fit on the chassis. The Death Skulls clan has elevated looting to an art form. They're known for being able to loot a vehicle, repair it, improve it, and then use it against the enemy in the same battle where they captured it. Their settlement areas are junkyards of epic proportions, filled with looted Imperial equipment, captured Eldar technology, scavenged Tau battlesuits, and anything else they've managed to nick over the years. Where other orcs might feel a twinge of shame at relying so heavily on looted gear, Death Skulls wear it as a badge of pride. They genuinely believe that blue is a lucky color, and since they believe it, the WAG field makes it true, at least to some extent. Mech boys are central to the looting process. They're the ones who can look at a pile of seemingly random parts and intuitively understand how they fit together. Give a mech boy the engine from a Lehman Russ, the weapons from a Chaos Space Marine Rhino, some random bits of scrap metal, and a few hours to work, and he'll cobble together something that moves, shoots, and explodes in roughly the direction you want it to. He won't be able to explain how he did it. The knowledge is instinctive, encoded in his DNA by the old ones millions of years ago, but he did it all the same. This instinctive engineering knowledge is both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, it means that orcs can maintain and even improve captured technology without formal training or technical manuals. On the other hand, it means that orc technology is wildly inconsistent. No two orc weapons are exactly alike, because each one is built by a different mech boy following his own instinctive understanding of how things should work. This lack of standardization makes mass production impossible, but in a society where individual achievement and showing off are highly valued, that's not necessarily a bad thing. When orcs encounter something they've never seen before, their first instinct is to poke it, hit it, and see what happens. If it doesn't explode or attack them immediately, they'll try to figure out what it does and whether they can use it. Mech boys in particular are drawn to interesting technology like moths to a flame, unable to resist tinkering with any machine they encounter. This curiosity is dangerous for the orcs and for everyone around them, but it's also what makes them so effective at adapting enemy technology to their own uses. So when orcs stumble across an ancient facility in the wilderness, when they find ruins that clearly once held something important, when their mech boys' eyes light up with the prospect of new technology to loot, the outcome is essentially inevitable. They're going in, They're taking everything that looks valuable, and they're going to try to get it working. The fact that they have no idea what they're dealing with, that the technology is 3,000 years old and belongs to a completely different species, that tampering with it might unleash consequences they can't possibly predict, none of that will slow them down for even a moment. After all, they're orcs. Caution is for gits. The discovery: when worlds collide. The orc warband that stumbles upon the ancient facility is a mixed group, mostly goths with a smattering of death skulls and a few freebooters along for the scrap. They're on this world because they heard there might be a fight here, and also because their war boss, a particularly large specimen named Gork's Masher Ironjaw, claimed he had a vision from Gork and Mork telling him to come here. The fact that this vision came after Gork's Masher was hit in the head with a shovel during a friendly disagreement with another knob is neither here nor there. The boys believe the boss, and that's what matters. The planet itself is a backwater, a forgotten rock circling a dying star in an obscure corner of the galaxy that sees traffic maybe once a century if it's lucky. It was once an imperial world, probably. The ruins of human settlements dot the landscape, but that was a long time ago. Now it's just wilderness, endless forests and plains broken up by the occasional mountain range or river system. The ruins are slowly being reclaimed by nature, vines growing through cracked walls, trees sprouting from the floors of buildings that once housed hundreds. The Orks have been on this planet for about 3 months, ever since their space hulk broke apart in the system's outer reaches, and they crashed a couple of looted transports onto the surface. They've been having a grand time, fighting among themselves mostly, since there aren't any other enemies readily available. But that's starting to get old. Even orcs can only fight each other for so long before they start looking for new opponents. The smaller boys are getting restless, and a restless orc is a dangerous thing. So when one of the scouting parties, led by a knob called Snagrot Defender, reports finding some kind of ancient building complex in the foothills of the northern mountains, Gork Smasher decides to investigate. Maybe there's enemies there. Maybe there's loot. Either way, it beats sitting around camp, waiting for something interesting to happen. The warband sets out at dawn, which for orcs means whenever enough of them have woken up and remembered there's somewhere they're supposed to be going. They're not what you'd call organized. The boys walk in loose mobs, arguing amongst themselves about who's the toughest or which gun makes the best noise when it fires. The few vehicles they've managed to cobble together rumble along at the back, billowing black smoke and occasionally backfiring loud enough to make everyone jump. Gretchens scurry underfoot, trying to avoid being stepped on by their larger cousins, while carrying supplies and equipment that the boys can't be bothered to haul themselves. The journey takes most of the day. Orcs aren't known for their sense of direction, and the warband gets turned around twice, once spending an hour walking in circles before someone realizes they've been following their own tracks. They stop for a scrap when 2 mobs get into an argument over whose clan is the best. They stop again when they find a river and decide it's a good place for a swim. Never mind that half of them can't actually swim and have to be fished out by their mates before they drown. By the time they actually reach the facility, the sun is setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that would be beautiful if the orcs were capable of appreciating such things. Instead, they're focused on the structure before them, and even by orc standards, it's impressive. The facility is built into the side of a mountain, or perhaps under it. It's hard to tell where the natural stone ends and the constructed elements begin. What's visible above ground is a massive entryway, easily 50 meters tall, made of some dark material that might be stone, or might be metal, or might be something in between. The doors, if they ever existed, are long gone. What remains is a gaping black opening that leads down into the earth. Vines have grown across the entrance, and small trees sprout from cracks in the structure, but the basic shape is still clear. This was built to last, and built to impress. Around the entrance are the remains of fortifications, wall sections that have mostly crumbled, but here and there you can still see the Gothic architecture that marks this as imperial construction. Gun emplacements that once held heavy weapons now hold nothing but dirt and bird nests. A statue that might have been an imperial saint or a space marine hero has toppled over, its features worn smooth by 3,000 years of wind and rain. Everything is covered in moss and lichen, green and grey growths that make it almost blend into the landscape. The orcs spread out, investigating the area with the thoroughness of professional scavengers. They find shell casings, ancient and corroded, but still recognizable as bolter rounds. They find pieces of armor, ceramite plates that have survived the millennia surprisingly well. They find bones, though whether they're human, orc, or something else entirely is impossible to tell after all this time. One lucky git finds an ancient bolter, its metal rusted and its mechanism seized, but still recognizable for what it is. He holds it up triumphantly, claiming it as his own, despite the fact that it probably hasn't fired a shot in 3,000 years and never will again. Gork Smasher stands before the entrance, staring into the darkness beyond. Even by orc standards, even by the standards of a being with minimal capacity for caution, something about this place feels ominous. The darkness beyond that entrance is absolute, untouched by the setting sun. There's a weight to it, a sense of age and forgotten purposes. For just a moment, the warboss considers turning around, going back to camp, forgetting this place exists. Then one of his boys calls out, having found more bolter shells, and the moment passes. There's clearly good loot here, and where there's loot, there might be a fight. Besides, the boys are excited now, chattering amongst themselves about what they might find inside. Gork Smasher can't back down in front of his warband, not without looking like he's scared. And if there's one thing an orc war boss can't afford to look like, it's scared. "Right den, boys," he bellows, his voice echoing off the ancient walls. "We's going in. Anybody what finds something good gets extra teeth. Anybody what runs away gets crumped. Now move it." The warband surges forward, Gretchen in front because someone has to check for traps and nobody important is going to risk it. They light torches, crude affairs made from scrap wood and whatever flammable liquid the mech boys had lying around. The flickering firelight does little to push back the darkness, but it's better than nothing. As the first orcs step through the ancient entrance and begin descending into the facility, their voices and the clatter of their equipment echoing in the enclosed space, none of them have any idea what they're about to find. Deep below, in a vault that has maintained its integrity for 3 millennia, in a stasis field powered by plasma coils that have never stopped working, in a sarcophagus designed to preserve its occupant through the very collapse of civilizations, something begins to change. The systems that maintain the Dreadnought's stasis are sophisticated, designed by the Adeptus Mechanicus at the height of the Imperium's technical prowess. They monitor thousands of variables: power levels, amniotic fluid composition, neural pathway integrity, life signs of the occupant. They are programmed with extensive fail-safes and redundancies. But they were never designed to account for orcs. The WAG field is a subtle thing. AG field. Usually, it doesn't announce its presence with thunder and lightning. It simply exists. A low-level psychic background noise that orcs generate simply by being orcs, especially when they're excited or gathered in large numbers. And right now, there are dozens of orcs in and around the facility, all of them excited about the prospect of loot and violence, all of them contributing to the gestalt psychic field that surrounds their species. This field seeps into the facility, invisible and intangible, affecting reality in ways so small that they're almost impossible to measure individually. A power coupling that was operating at exactly the correct frequency shifts slightly. A sensor that was calibrated to 6 decimal places suddenly reads 7. A plasma coil that has been outputting exactly 1,000 units of energy for 3,000 years begins outputting 1,001. Each change is minuscule. Each one, taken alone, would be well within the tolerance of the systems. But there are hundreds of such changes, thousands, all happening simultaneously, all subtly pushing the stasis systems away from their carefully calibrated parameters. The monitoring systems detect the anomalies, of course. They were built to detect anomalies. But the machine spirits that govern the facility's functions are ancient and operating on programming that was established 3,000 years ago, when the galaxy was a very different place. The protocols for dealing with minor system fluctuations are clear. Observe, log, and compensate. So the systems observe the changes, log them in memory banks that haven't been accessed in millennia, and attempt to compensate by adjusting other variables to maintain equilibrium. But the whack field doesn't stop affecting the systems. If anything, it gets stronger as more Orks enter the facility, as they get more excited about the potential for discovery. The compensating adjustments begin to compound. A power regulator increases output to compensate for the fluctuation in the coupling, which causes a heat variance that triggers cooling systems that haven't activated in centuries, which draws power from reserves that were allocated for other purposes, which triggers a rebalancing protocol that adjusts energy distribution across the entire facility. None of this is catastrophic. None of it would, under normal circumstances, cause any significant problems. But these are not normal circumstances. The facility has been operating autonomously for 3,000 years. Some systems have degraded despite all the redundancies. Others have adapted in unexpected ways. Machine spirits developing quirks and preferences through millennia of unattended operation. The sudden cascade of adjustments, small though each one is, begins to stress systems that have been operating in perfect stability for longer than most civilizations exist. Deep in the stasis vault, in the sarcophagus that holds the ancient, a warning light flickers on for the first time in 3,000 years, then another, and another. The systems are moving outside their normal parameters, not catastrophically, not yet. But the trend is clear. If something doesn't change, if the anomalous readings don't stabilize, the facility's protocols are clear. Wake the ancient. But for now, the Dreadnought sleeps on, unaware of the green tide descending into his tomb, unaware that his 3,000-year slumber is about to come to an abrupt and violent end. In the corridors above his vault, Orks explore ancient chambers and marvel at the human technology they find. They don't understand what most of it does, but that's never stopped an Ork before. They pry panels off walls, looking for valuable components. They smash open storage lockers, hoping to find weapons or ammunition. They argue over who gets to keep particularly shiny bits of scrap metal. And with each door they force open, each wall they break through, each piece of ancient equipment they damage or destroy, in their enthusiastic exploration, the facility's systems react, adapt, and compensate. The cascade continues, slow but inexorable, each adjustment spawning the need for another adjustment, each change pushing the systems further from their long-held equilibrium. The mech boy, a crafty git called Gizgob, who's smarter than most Orks and knows it, has separated from the main group. He's following power conduits, tracing them through the walls with equipment that he cobbled together from scrap, and that shouldn't work, but does, because he's an Ork and he believes it works. The conduits are leading him down, deeper into the facility, toward whatever is drawing massive amounts of power from the ancient plasma coils that still somehow function after all this time. He passes through chambers that haven't seen light in 3 millennia, his torch casting long shadows on walls covered in high Gothic script that he can't read and wouldn't understand if he could. He steps over ancient debris, the detritus of a chapter's final days in this place. A broken weapon here, a piece of armor there, the desiccated remains of something that might once have been organic, but is now just dust and fragments. And he descends, following the conduits, following the power flow, drawn by the promise of something big, something important, something that's still working after all this time. Drawn toward a vault that he doesn't know exists, toward a warrior who has been sleeping since before the mech boy's ancestors were even spores, toward a meeting that will change everything. The tinkering begins. Orkish engineering meets Imperial technology. Gizgob reaches the vault door before anyone else in the warband. It's a massive thing, easily 3 meters tall and half as wide, made of what he recognizes as adamantium, even though he doesn't know that particular word for it. He just knows it's the really tough stuff, the kind that doesn't bend or break no matter how hard you hit it. The door is sealed, has been sealed, for 3,000 years, and it's not designed to open from the outside. There's no handle, no visible lock, no obvious mechanism, just a smooth surface of metal with some high Gothic script across the top that Gizgob can't read. A sensible being might have given up at this point, concluded that without the proper access codes or authorization, the door simply isn't opening. But Gizgob isn't a sensible being. He's an orc mech boy, which means his relationship with concepts like security systems and authorized access is tenuous at best. To Gizgob, a locked door isn't a barrier. It's a challenge. He sets down his toolkit, a battered metal box containing an assortment of tools that range from the crude to the surprisingly sophisticated, all of them stained with oil and blood and the residue of previous projects. He circles the door, examining it from every angle, tapping it with a wrench here and there to listen to the sound it makes. Solid, very solid. But everything has weaknesses, even adamantium. You just have to know where to look. The power conduits he was following run into the wall beside the door, disappearing into what must be the locking mechanism. Gizgob grins, yellowed tusks protruding from his lower jaw. If the lock has power, he can work with that. He produces a device that looks like a cross between a power drill and a neural probe, winds it up, and jams it into the wall where the conduits run. Sparks fly. Something inside the wall makes a noise like a wounded animal. Then the door shudders, just slightly, barely perceptible, but Gizgob feels it. His grin widens. "That's it," he mutters to himself. "Just got to convince you to wake up." He works for the better part of an hour, occasionally cursing when he gets a shock from a live wire, occasionally whooping with glee when he manages to bypass another security protocol. He has no idea how any of this actually works, not in the sense that an Imperial tech priest would understand it, but his genetically encoded knowledge tells him which bits to twist, which wires to cross, which components to short out to achieve the results he wants. The door's security systems are sophisticated, designed by the Adeptus Mechanicus to resist tampering by enemies of the Imperium, but they were designed to resist tampering by beings who understood technology in a conventional sense, who would try to hack the systems or break them through brute force. They weren't designed to resist tampering by someone who combines brute force with a complete disregard for safety protocols and an instinctive understanding of how to make things work, despite having no idea why they work. Above all, they weren't designed to resist tampering in the presence of a wag field. Every time Gizgob makes an adjustment that by all rights should catastrophically fail, the field smooths over the impossibilities, makes the improbable just barely possible. A circuit that should have burned out instead holds together just long enough for Gizgob to modify it into something that works. A power surge that should have fried the entire security system instead triggers a cascade that resets it to factory defaults. A wire connected to completely the wrong component somehow completes a circuit anyway. Finally, with a sound like a groan of long disused machinery, the door begins to slide open. It moves slowly, reluctantly, mechanisms that haven't moved in 3,000 years protesting against being awakened. Dust falls from the edges as ancient seals break. Air that hasn't circulated in millennia rushes out, carrying with it a scent of ozone and something else, something clinical and sterile and utterly alien to the fungal stench that orcs carry with them everywhere. The door opens fully, revealing the vault beyond. Gizgob steps through, holding his torch high, his eyes widening as he takes in what he's seeing. The vault is circular, about 20 meters in diameter, with walls that are smooth and unmarked, except for more of that high Gothic script that Gizgob can't read. The floor is polished metal, so clean that it reflects the torchlight like a mirror, unmarred by 3,000 years of disuse. And in the center of the vault, secured in a framework of cables and power conduits, surrounded by blinking lights and humming machinery, is the Dreadnought. It's massive, even by Ork standards. Gizgob has seen Def Dreads before, the Ork equivalent of dreadnoughts, hulking constructions of scrap metal and violence. But those are crude things, cobbled together from whatever materials were available. This is something else entirely. It's beautiful in a way that even Gizgob, with his limited appreciation for aesthetics, can recognize. The Dreadnought stands roughly 4 meters tall, its armored shell painted in colors that have faded over the millennia, but are still visible, deep blue and gold, with scrollwork and purity seals covering almost every surface. Its left arm is a massive power fist, easily capable of crushing a tank. Its right arm is an assault cannon, the barrels dark and silent but clearly deadly even at rest. Its legs are thick and heavily armored, designed to support the weight of all that weaponry and armor, while still allowing the machine to move with surprising agility. But what catches Gizgob's attention, what makes even his greenskin heart beat a little faster with excitement, is the fact that this thing is clearly still operational. The lights on its chassis are blinking in sequence. The power conduits feeding into it are humming with energy. There's a sense of latent power here, of something waiting to be unleashed. This isn't a dead relic. This is a sleeping giant. Gizgob approaches slowly, his engineering mind already racing through possibilities. Could he take this apart? Probably, but it would take forever, and he'd likely break half of it in the process. Could he use it for parts? Maybe, but that seems like a waste. This thing is clearly meant to be a weapon, and weapons should be used, not disassembled. Could he wake it up? The thought strikes him like a bolt of inspiration. He doesn't need to take it apart or loot it for parts. He can activate it, get it working, and then, well, he's not sure what comes after that. But he's certain it will be exciting. And if there's one thing Gizgob loves more than looting, it's excitement. He sets down his toolkit and begins examining the Dreadnought more closely, walking around it, studying the various ports and access panels that cover its surface. There are dozens of them, maybe hundreds, each one clearly serving some specific function. He has no idea what most of them do, but that's fine. He'll figure it out as he goes. That's the Ork way. He selects an access panel at random, one located low on the Dreadnought's back. It's secured with some kind of molecular seal that's supposed to be impossible to open without the proper authorization codes. Gizgob hits it with his wrench. The seal breaks. The panel pops open, revealing a maze of circuitry and components that would give an Imperial tech priest nightmares. Gizgob sticks his hands in and starts tinkering. He has no plan, no blueprint, no understanding of what he's actually doing. He just follows his instincts, guided by the genetic knowledge encoded in his DNA by the old ones millions of years ago. This wire looks like it should connect to that component. This circuit would work better if it was bypassed entirely. This power feed is clearly not running at optimal capacity. He works with the confidence of someone who doesn't know enough to realize how badly things could go wrong. He crosses wires that should never be crossed. He bypasses safety systems that exist for very good reasons. He cranks power outputs to levels that would make the machine's original designers weep with horror. And somehow, impossibly, it works. Or at least, it doesn't catastrophically explode, which by Ork standards is pretty much the same thing as working. The Dreadnought's systems, already stressed by the presence of the WAG field and the Ork incursion into the facility, begin responding to Gizgob's tampering in ways their programming never anticipated. Security protocols activate, trying to determine what's accessing the systems and whether it has authorization. Defensive subroutines spin up, checking whether the Dreadnought is under attack and should activate weapon systems. Power management protocols detect the massive fluctuations Gizgob is causing and attempt to compensate, routing energy through backup systems and secondary pathways. And deep in the sarcophagus, in the amniotic fluid that has preserved the ancient's body for 3,000 years, sensors begin detecting changes. Heart rate increasing, neural activity spiking, brain patterns shifting from the delta waves of deep stasis to the beta waves of approaching consciousness. The ancient is beginning to wake, but it's not a clean awakening, not the carefully managed process that's supposed to happen when a dreadnought is brought out of stasis. There should be tech priests monitoring every system, gradually increasing power levels, performing diagnostic checks at each stage, ensuring that the transition from stasis to full consciousness happens smoothly over several hours. Instead, Gizgob's enthusiastic tinkering is causing the systems to activate in essentially random order, with power levels fluctuating wildly and protocols triggering without the usual safeguards. The ancient's consciousness begins to surface like a drowning man struggling toward air. For 3,000 years, there has been nothing. No dreams, no passage of time, no awareness of anything at all. Just the absolute void of stasis. And now, suddenly, sensation returns. Pain first, his body screaming in protest as neural pathways that have been dormant for millennia suddenly fire all at once. Then sound, the hum of machinery filtering through audio processors that take a moment to calibrate. Then sight, optical sensors coming online and feeding him data that his brain struggles to process. Where is he? The last thing he remembers is, what? A battlefield? Yes, there was fighting. He was deployed to hold a position, to buy time for his brothers to regroup. There were enemies, so many enemies, more than he could count. There was fire and blood and the thunder of weapons, and then nothing, just the void. And now this. His optical sensors focus, the images resolving from blur into clarity. He sees the vault around him, familiar yet strange. He recognizes it as a stasis chamber, though the specific configuration doesn't match his memories. He sees the cables and conduits connecting him to the facility's power systems. He sees status indicators blinking on his chassis, most of them showing green, some showing amber, a few showing red. And then he sees the Ork. Gizgob, oblivious to the fact that he's just woken something that should have stayed asleep, is still tinkering with the access panel, still making improvements to systems he doesn't understand. He's muttering to himself in the Orkish language, a guttural cacophony of harsh syllables and enthusiastic cursing. He hasn't looked up yet. He hasn't seen the Dreadnought's optical sensors tracking his movements. Inside the sarcophagus, the ancient's mind races through possibilities, trying to understand what's happening. An Ork. There's an Ork tampering with his systems. How did an Ork get into a space marine facility? Where are his battle brothers? Where is the chapter? Why was he in stasis in the first place? The questions pile up faster than he can process them, his mind still foggy from the long sleep, his thoughts slow and confused. He tries to move, to activate his weapon systems, to defend himself against this threat. His limbs respond sluggishly, power feeds not yet fully online. His assault cannon traverses a few degrees, servos whining in protest. The sound makes Gizgob look up. For a long moment, Ork and Dreadnought stare at each other across the vault. Gizgob's eyes are wide with surprise and a dawning realization of what he's just done. The ancient's optical sensors burn with a cold blue light, photoreceptors focusing on the green skin with an intensity that would make lesser beings flee in terror. Then Gizgob does something that only an Ork would do in this situation. He grins. "Oh," he says, his voice filled with genuine delight. "You're awake, Den. That's proper good, that is. I got loads of questions about how this whole thing works." The ancient's response is the grinding mechanical roar of his assault cannon cycling up to firing status, barrels beginning to rotate with the promise of imminent death. but his systems are still bringing themselves online, still running through startup sequences and diagnostic checks. He's not at full combat capability yet. He can't fire. Not yet. Gizgob, perhaps sensing that he's moments away from being turned into component atoms, does what orcs do best when faced with overwhelming force. He runs, not away from the facility, not even away from the vault, just to the other side of the chamber, putting some distance between himself and the increasingly active Dreadnought while he figures out his next move. Behind him, the Ancient completes his startup sequence, weapons hot, sensors online, power at 80% and climbing. He is awake, he is functional, and he is very, very angry. The Ancient takes his first step in 3,000 years, servos protesting, armor plates grinding against each other as they settle into proper alignment. The sound echoes through the vault like thunder. He takes another step, more confident this time, the machine spirit of the Dreadnought responding to his commands with the reliability of millennia-old engineering. Gizgob watches from his position across the vault, his mech boy brain already working on the problem. He's awakened something he can't control, something that clearly wants him dead. But he's also awakened something incredibly valuable, a working example of Imperial technology that no Orc has seen in functioning condition for who knows how long. If he can just figure out how to communicate, how to make the Humi understand. "Hold on!" he shouts, holding up his hands in what he hopes is a universal gesture of peace, though the wrench he's still clutching rather undermines the effect. "I didn't mean nothing by it. I was just having a look, see? Just a friendly tinker like." The Ancient's response is to raise his assault cannon and finally achieve targeting lock. The barrels spin up to full speed, a sound like 1,000 chainsaws all starting at once. In approximately 3 seconds, he will open fire, and Gizgob will cease to exist in any meaningful sense. And then the vault door explodes inward as the rest of the Orc warband arrives, drawn by the noise and by Gizgob's increasingly frantic shouts for help. Dozens of Orcs pour into the chamber, weapons drawn, ready for a fight. They see Gizgob. They see the massive armored figure menacing their mech boy. And with the simple clarity of beings whose solution to every problem involves hitting it really hard, they immediately charge at the Dreadnought, bellowing war cries that echo off the Ancient walls. The Ancient's tactical assessment systems that have analyzed 1,000 battlefields over the course of his long service, immediately categorize the threat. Multiple hostiles, infantry class, armed with crude firearms and melee weapons, standard Orc mob, threat level, moderate, recommended action, suppressive fire followed by close combat if they close to melee range. He opens fire, and the vault becomes a storm of violence and death. The battle joined. Ancient fury meets Orc cunning. The assault cannon's roar is deafening in the enclosed space of the vault, a continuous thunder that makes the very walls shake. Shells the size of a human fist pour from the rotating barrels at a rate of hundreds per round, explosive rounds designed to penetrate armor and detonate inside soft targets. Against unarmored Orcs in close quarters, the effect is catastrophic. The first rank of charging Orcs simply ceases to exist, torn apart by the fusillade before they can even register what's happening. Blood and bits of fungal flesh spray across the vault floor. The Orcs behind them fare little better, the assault cannon's shells punching through multiple targets before exploding, each round creating a miniature slaughter within the packed mob. Within seconds, a dozen Orcs are dead or dying, and the survivors are diving for cover behind anything that might offer protection. But Orcs are nothing if not resilient, and the sight of their mates being torn apart doesn't frighten them so much as excite them. This is what they came here for. This is a proper scrap. The survivors open fire from whatever cover they can find, bullets and slugs pinging off the Dreadnought's thick armor, doing minimal damage, but forcing the Ancient to choose targets, to prioritize threats. The Ancient moves with a grace that seems impossible for something so massive. He advances toward the largest concentration of enemies, his assault cannon never stopping its rotation, never ceasing its thunder. His targeting systems track multiple threats simultaneously, prioritizing targets based on weapons carried, angle of attack, distance. An orc with a rocket launcher gets priority over one with just a slugger. An orc attempting to flank gets more attention than one pinned behind cover. But there are just so many of them. For every orc the Ancient kills, 2 more seem to pour through the vault door. And while his armor is thick, while it was designed to withstand anti-tank weapons and come out functional, it's not invincible. The cumulative damage from hundreds of impacts, even from crude orc weapons, begins to tell. Armor plate gets chipped, sensors get cracked, warning lights begin to flash on his status display as minor systems fail under the assault. Gizgob, meanwhile, has pressed himself against the far wall, watching the carnage with a mixture of horror and professional fascination. He's seen battles before, participated in plenty of them, but there's something uniquely terrifying about watching a Dreadnought in action from this close. Every movement is precise, calculated. There's no wasted motion, no hesitation. It's like watching a master craftsman at work, if that craftsman's medium was death and his tools were enough firepower to level a building. An idea forms in his mechboy brain. The Humi, the one in the metal suit, is very good at killing orcs. But orcs are also very good at killing things once they get close enough. The problem is getting close enough. The assault cannon is keeping everyone pinned down, unable to advance without being turned into chunky salsa. But what if the assault cannon could be convinced to stop working? Gizgob still has his tools. More importantly, he knows which systems he was tinkering with when the Dreadnought woke up. He doesn't understand how they work, not really, but he understands cause and effect. If he did that to wake it up, maybe he can do something similar to make it less effective. It's worth a try anyway. Certainly better than just standing here waiting to catch a stray shell. He begins working his way around the edge of the vault, staying low, keeping behind cover when possible. The orcs are keeping the Dreadnought busy, preventing it from focusing on any single target for too long. Gizgob moves with surprising stealth for something his size, the chaos of battle providing all the distraction he needs. The Ancient notices the mechboy's movement, tracks it peripherally while maintaining fire on the main mob. This one is different from the others, smarter, more dangerous in the long term. But right now, the immediate threat is the orcs with guns actively trying to kill him, so the mechboy has to wait. Gizgob reaches one of the access panels he opened earlier, the one on the Dreadnought's back. It's still hanging open, circuits and components exposed. He doesn't have time for subtle work, doesn't have the luxury of carefully adjusting settings and monitoring results. So he does what orcs do best when they don't have time for finesse. He starts ripping things out. The first component he yanks free causes the Dreadnought's assault cannon to stutter, the smooth rotation of the barrels hiccuping for just a moment before resuming. The Ancient's warning systems scream alerts, telling him that something has just gone very wrong with his primary weapon. He tries to pivot, to bring his secondary systems to bear on whatever is causing the malfunction, but he's surrounded by orcs who immediately take advantage of the momentary lull in fire to press their attack. Gizgob tears out another component, then another. The assault cannon's fire becomes increasingly erratic, shells cooking off at random intervals instead of the steady stream the weapon is designed to produce. Then it stops entirely, the barrels grinding to a halt as the feed mechanism fails completely. The orcs see their chance and take it. With a collective roar that shakes dust from the ceiling, they surge forward, abandoning cover, throwing themselves at the Dreadnought with the reckless courage that's gotten countless orcs killed over the millennia, but has also won them impossible victories. They swarm over the Ancient like green, angry ants, hacking at his armor with choppers, trying to pry open access panels, searching for weak points to exploit. The Ancient responds by switching to his power fist, the massive weapon coming alive with barely contained energy as its power field activates. He swats an orc aside, the impact sending the greenskin flying across the vault to impact the wall with a wet crunch. Another orc tries to climb up his leg. The ancient shifts his weight and simply steps on the creature, ceramite boot crushing the orc into the floor with a sound like a watermelon exploding. But there are too many of them, and they're too close for his weapons to be fully effective. This is exactly the kind of combat orcs excel at, close and brutal, where their natural toughness and their joy in violence give them an edge, even against superior foes. The ancient feels impacts all across his hull as orcs attack any part of his armor they can reach. He feels vibrations through his chassis as they try to pry open access panels. He feels the worrying grind of a servo damaged by a lucky hit with a power claw. This is not sustainable. He's taking damage faster than his repair systems can compensate. If he doesn't break free, if he doesn't create some distance, they'll overwhelm him through sheer weight of numbers and persistence. But breaking free means abandoning his position, potentially exposing his back to more attacks. Tactical assessment says his best option is to advance through them, to use his mass and armor to bull through the mob and create space on the other side. He surges forward, servos straining under the load of his own weight, plus the orcs clinging to his armor. Several orcs lose their grip and fall to the floor, where they're immediately crushed under his footfalls. Others hang on, still hacking away at his armor, still trying to find a way through to the vulnerable components beneath. The ancient makes it halfway across the vault, before one of the orcs, either through incredible luck or surprising cunning, manages to pry open an access panel on his shoulder assembly. The orc jams his chopper into the revealed mechanisms and twists. Something important breaks. Warning klaxons sound inside the ancient's consciousness. His right arm goes dead, the assault cannon becoming just dead weight as the power feeds are severed. The ancient's tactical response is immediate and decisive. If he can't use that arm as a weapon, he can at least make sure the orc who disabled it doesn't live to celebrate. He slams his inactive assault cannon arm against the nearest wall, crushing the orc clinging to it between tons of adamantium and solid stone. The greenskin's grip loosens. The ancient pivots and brings his power fist down on the creature's head, ending its involvement in the fight with extreme prejudice. But the damage is done. He's down to one functioning arm. His mobility is compromised by the orcs still clinging to his legs, and his sensor systems are reporting damage to multiple critical components. He's not defeated, not yet, but he's hurt in ways that concern him. If this continues much longer, if the orcs actually manage to breach his sarcophagus, the thought is too horrible to complete. Inside his armored shell, suspended in amniotic fluid, what remains of his body is completely helpless. If they breach the sarcophagus, he dies. Not the clean death of a warrior in battle, but a messy, prolonged death as his life support fails and his ruined body finally gives out. He's not afraid of death. He's been technically dead, or close enough to it, for 3,000 years. But he is afraid of dying like this, torn apart by Xenos in a forgotten vault, unmourned and unremembered. The fear, perhaps paradoxically, clears his mind. He stops thinking about this as a battle to win and starts thinking about it as a problem to solve. The orcs have numbers, ferocity, and an alarming resistance to damage. He has armor, experience, and weapons that are individually more powerful than anything the orcs can field. The question is how to leverage his advantages while minimizing his disadvantages. First priority, clear the orcs from his chassis. He can't fight effectively while they're actively sabotaging his systems. He looks around the vault, analyzing the terrain with the calculating precision of a being who has fought on 1,000 battlefields. There, the vault entrance. It's narrow, only about 3 meters wide. If he can reach it, he can use the doorframe to scrape off the orcs clinging to his armor. He begins moving toward the entrance, each step carefully calculated to maintain balance, despite the uneven weight distribution caused by the orcs on his frame. The greenskins, realizing his intention, redouble their efforts to bring him down. Choppers bite into his armor. A lucky shot from a slugger finds a gap in his plating and ricochets around inside his chassis, damaging components before lodging in a non-critical area. An orc with a power claw manages to sever a power cable, causing his left leg to momentarily lose power before backup systems compensate. But he reaches the doorframe, and then he does exactly what he planned, deliberately slamming his bulk against the adamantium frame hard enough to jar loose several orcs. He does it again, harder this time, feeling more orcs fall away. Some of them land on their feet and immediately try to climb back up. Others land poorly and don't get up again. A third impact clears his chassis almost entirely, leaving only one persistent orc clinging to his back. The Ancient can't reach his own back with his remaining functional arm. The orc knows this, and he's using the protected position to continue working on exposed systems, doing more damage with each passing moment. The Ancient needs to remove this threat, but how? Then he sees Gizgob, the mech boy who started all of this, still standing by the access panel he was sabotaging. The greenskin has a wrench in his hand and a look of calculation on his face. An idea forms in the Ancient's tactical assessment systems. It's risky, it's unorthodox, it's probably going to get him killed. But if he's going to die today, he's going to take as many of these Xenos with him as possible. He charges at Gizgob, using his bulk and his still functioning power fist to smash aside any orcs in his path. Gizgob's eyes widen as he realizes he's the target, and he does the only sensible thing. He drops his wrench and runs. But there's nowhere to run to in the enclosed vault. The Ancient catches up with him in 3 ground-eating strides, grabs the mech boy with his power fist, and then pivots. The orc on his back, focused on sabotage and not paying attention to what the Dreadnought is doing, doesn't see the wall coming until it's too late. The Ancient slams himself backward into the wall with all the force he can generate, crushing the orc between his armor and solid stone. He feels the impact through his chassis, feels something give way as the orc's grip finally loosens. He pushes off the wall and repeats the maneuver, making absolutely certain the threat is neutralized. When he steps away from the wall, there's a smear of green blood and broken bits marking where the orc used to be. The Ancient takes a moment to run a systems check. Multiple damaged components, power at 60% and falling, mobility compromised, assault cannon completely non-functional, power fist operating at diminished capacity. But he's still operational, still capable of fighting, and he's still holding Gizgob. The mech boy looks up at the Dreadnought's optical sensors, seeing his own reflection in the cold blue light. He's acutely aware that he's being held by a weapon that could crush him like a tin can without even straining. He's acutely aware that the Ancient warrior inside this machine has every reason to do exactly that. He's acutely aware that he's probably got about 3 seconds left to live unless he does something very clever, very quickly. "Right," Gizgob says, his voice remarkably steady considering the circumstances. "So, we got off to a bad start, yeah? What say we call it even and have a proper chat, like civilized gits?" The Ancient's response is to begin increasing pressure on his power fist, slowly crushing the mech boy. Gizgob yelps and struggles, but he might as well be trying to fight a hydraulic press for all the good it does. Around them, the surviving orcs are beginning to regroup, seeing their mech boy in trouble and getting ready for another charge. But before either the Ancient can finish crushing Gizgob or the orcs can mount their attack, something unexpected happens. The vault's power systems, already stressed to their limits by the Ancient's awakening and the subsequent battle, finally fail. The lights go out. The humming of machinery dies. Emergency lighting kicks in, bathing everything in a dim red glow that turns the scene even more hellish than it already was. And in the sudden near darkness, as orcs and Dreadnought alike try to adjust to the new conditions, Gizgob sees his chance. He still has a few tools strapped to his belt, things he grabbed in his hurry to get away from the Dreadnought earlier. One of them is a plasma cutter, a small handheld device meant for precision work, but capable of generating a lot of heat in a very focused area. He yanks it free from his belt, activates it, and jams it directly into the joint, where the power fist's thumb connects to the rest of the mechanism. The intense heat immediately begins melting through components never meant to withstand such abuse. The Ancient feels the damage, feels his grip weakening. But by the time he reacts, it's too late. Gizgob wriggles free and drops to the floor, rolling away before the Ancient can grab him again. The mech boy scrambles to his feet and runs, not toward the other Orks, but towards the vault entrance. The Ancient moves to pursue, but his damaged systems are slowing him down, and in the dim emergency lighting, his optical sensors are struggling to maintain target lock. By the time he reaches the entrance, Gizgob has already disappeared into the facility's corridors, lost in the darkness and the maze-like layout. Behind the Ancient, the remaining Orks are regrouping, their numbers diminished, but their enthusiasm undimmed. In the darkness, the battle continues. A brutal grinding match between an ancient warrior fighting on damaged systems and a mob of Xenos who view the whole thing as the best entertainment they've had in months. It's going to be a long night. The aftermath and multiple futures. When dawn breaks over the ancient facility, the battle inside has finally run its course. The vault is a charnel house, the floor slick with orc blood and littered with bodies. Some are barely recognizable as having once been living creatures. Others are mostly intact, just very dead. The walls are scorched from weapons fire. The ceiling has partially collapsed in one section. The whole place reeks of violence and fungal decay. The Dreadnought stands in the center of it all, his armor scarred and dented, his systems running on emergency power, his weapons disabled or destroyed. But he stands. He survived. The Orks who fought him did not, or at least most of them didn't. Some fled when it became clear they weren't going to win. Others fought to the last, driven by that peculiar orcish combination of courage and stupidity. But victory, such as it is, comes at a cost. The Ancient's damage is extensive. His assault cannon is completely destroyed, the feed mechanism shattered beyond repair. His power fist still functions, but barely. The system's damaged by Gizgob's plasma cutter, limiting its effectiveness. His mobility is severely compromised, servos grinding and power feeds flickering. He estimates he has perhaps 12 hours of operational time left before his systems shut down entirely, placing him in an emergency stasis until repairs can be made. Repairs that will never come, because there's no one left to make them. He doesn't know this yet, doesn't know that his chapter is scattered or destroyed, that the facility has been abandoned for 3,000 years, that he's the last survivor of a catastrophe that happened before the Orks who attacked him were even spores. But he's beginning to suspect the age of the facility, the complete absence of battle brothers, the fact that Xenos could penetrate so deep into what should have been a secure Imperial installation. All of it points to something having gone catastrophically wrong. He accesses the facility's data systems, or tries to. Most are offline, damaged by time or the recent battle or both. What he can access provides only fragmented information. Records of a siege, reports of casualties mounting beyond sustainable levels, a final transmission ordering evacuation, and then nothing, just centuries of automated status reports gradually degrading as systems failed one by one. The picture that emerges is bleak. His chapter made a last stand here, held against overwhelming odds for as long as they could, then evacuated what forces remained. He was left behind, not deliberately, he hopes, a casualty of the chaos, his location lost in the confusion of retreat, but left behind nonetheless, to sleep for 3,000 years while the galaxy moved on without him. Outside the facility, Gizgob and the surviving Orks are having what passes for a strategic discussion among greenskins, which mostly involves shouting at each other and occasionally hitting someone who suggests something particularly stupid. The mech boy has explained what happened in the vault, how he woke up the massive Humi in the metal suit, how it killed dozens of their boys, how it's still in there probably waiting for them to come back. Opinions are divided on what to do next. Some Orks want to go back in and finish the fight. They came here for a scrap, and by Gork and Mork they're going to have one. Others are more cautious, or at least as cautious as Orks get. That Hume killbot is clearly dangerous. Maybe they should come back with more boys, or better guns, or at least after they've had some fungus beer and a nap. Gizgob has a different idea entirely. That Dreadnought, damaged as it is, represents an incredible opportunity for an Ork with vision. If they could capture it, repair it, maybe even figure out how to control it, they'd have a weapon unlike anything the warband has ever possessed. Sure, it would take time. Sure, it would be dangerous. Sure, there's a very good chance they'd all get killed trying, but when has that ever stopped an Ork from doing something stupid and potentially profitable? The question is how to pitch this to Gork Smasher, the war boss. Gork Smasher is big and strong and good in a fight, but he's not what you'd call imaginative. He's more of a hit it until it stops moving kind of leader. Getting him to sign off on a plan that involves anything more sophisticated than charging straight at the enemy and shooting is going to take some convincing. Meanwhile, back in the vault, the Ancient has made a decision. He can't stay here. The facility is compromised, possibly enemy-held. His systems are failing. He needs to reach somewhere defensible where he can enter stasis and wait for rescue. The fact that rescue is never coming is something he chooses not to think about. A warrior doesn't give up, not while he still has operational capacity, not while he can still serve the Emperor. He begins making his way through the facility, moving slowly to conserve power, his sensors on maximum sensitivity for any sign of additional Orks. The corridors are dark and silent, lit only by emergency lighting that casts everything in shades of red and black. He passes through rooms he remembers from before his long sleep, sees how they've decayed over the millennia. A barracks where he once sparred with battle brothers now lies empty, bunks collapsed and uniforms rotted to nothing. An armory that once held enough weapons to outfit a company now contains only rust and dust. A chapel where he once prayed lies desecrated by time, the icons and scrolls crumbled away to nothing. It's like walking through a tomb, which, he supposes, is exactly what he's doing. This is a tomb. His tomb, and the tomb of his chapter's presence on this world. 3,000 years have turned everything he knew into ruins. 3,000 years have erased the evidence of his brother's existence, leaving only these empty halls and his own fading memories. He's so focused on his thoughts and his navigation that he almost doesn't notice when he's surrounded. The Orks have been following him, tracking him through the facility, waiting for the right moment. That moment is now. They pour out of doorways and corridors, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. More than were in the initial attack. Gork Smasher has brought the whole warband, every Ork and Gretchen they could muster. They form a loose circle around the Ancient, weapons raised but not firing, waiting for their warboss to give the order. Gork Smasher steps forward, his massive frame making even other Orks look small by comparison. He studies the Dreadnought with an expression that might be respect, might be calculation, might be hunger. Hard to tell with Orks. "Right den," the warboss says, his voice booming through the corridor. "You're that big Hume Gizgob was going on about. Gotta say, you're even more impressive den," he said. "Killed a lot of me boys, you did. That's good fighting, dat." I can respect good fighting. The Ancient's response is to level his damaged power fist at the warboss, the weapon humming with what power it can still generate. The message is clear. Come any closer and find out how much fight is left in this old warrior. Gork Smasher grins, tusks gleaming in the emergency lighting. Now, no need for dat. I'm here to make you a deal. See, we could keep fighting. Probably you'd kill a bunch more of me boys before we finally brought you down. Waste of good Orks, that would be. Or, he pauses for effect. Or you could come work for us. The Ancient would laugh if his vocoder was capable of it. Work for Orks. The very suggestion is absurd, insulting. He's a space marine, even in his current reduced state. He serves the Emperor of mankind and the Emperor alone. He would die before he worked for Xenos. Gork Smasher seems to read this in the Ancient's posture, in the way he's bracing for a fight even on his damaged systems. Yeah, I figured you'd say something like that. So here's the deal. You can fight us, and you'll lose, and we'll take you apart for scrap. Or you can surrender, and we'll take you apart anyway, but more careful like. Gizgob reckons he can make you work for us, get you all fixed up and programmed right. Either way, we get a new toy. Only difference is how many more orcs you kill first. It's not a choice. Not really, but it does present options, and the ancient's tactical mind immediately begins analyzing them. If he fights and dies, that's the end of his story. 3,000 years of service ended by crude Xenos in a forgotten facility. His gene seed lost, his chapter's legacy diminished by one more fallen hero. If he surrenders, well, he's not sure what happens then. The Orc claims they can reprogram him, but that seems unlikely. The machine spirit of a Dreadnought isn't some simple computer that can be hacked and repurposed. It's a complex fusion of technology and faith, designed specifically to resist such attempts. But surrendering would buy time. Time for his systems to rest, to conserve power. Time to observe the Orcs and learn their weaknesses. Time to plan an escape or a counterattack. Time is the one resource he desperately needs and doesn't have if he fights now. The Ancient lowers his power fist. Not in surrender, not exactly, but in acknowledgement that the war boss has a point. Fighting now, in his condition, against these numbers, would be suicide. And while a glorious death has its appeal, a tactical withdrawal has its uses too. Gork Smasher's grin widens. That's what I thought. Boys, get him secured, and be careful with him. I want this one intact. Possible outcomes. 4 futures. The story of the Ancient and the Orcs who discovered him could end in many ways. Each potential outcome tells us something different about the nature of the Warhammer 40,000 universe, about the relationship between the Imperium and its enemies, about the ultimate fate of warriors who have given everything in service to a cause that may or may not remember them. Let's explore the most likely scenarios. Scenario 1. The Ancient's Last Stand. In this version of events, the Ancient does not surrender. He cannot surrender. The very concept is antithetical to everything he is, everything he was trained to be from the moment he was inducted into his chapter as a neophyte. Space Marines do not surrender to Xenos. They fight, they die if necessary, but they do not bow to alien masters. So when Gork Smasher makes his offer, the Ancient's response is to open fire with every weapon system he has left. His damaged power fist lashes out, catching the warboss by surprise, and crushing several ribs before the Orc can react. His Vox speakers blast litanies of hate, mechanically synthesized prayers to the Emperor that echo through the corridors like the voice of an angry god. The Orcs respond, as Orcs always do, with overwhelming violence. They pour fire into the Ancient from every direction, bullets and shells and crude rockets slamming into his armor in a metal storm. Some bounce off, others find gaps, damaged sections where his earlier battle has left him vulnerable. His systems scream warnings that he ignores, pushing damaged components past their safety limits, trading future functionality for immediate combat effectiveness. He kills dozens of them. His power fist becomes a weapon of terrifying efficiency, each swing crushing Orcs like toys. He uses his bulk as a weapon, charging through their lines, trampling greenskins under his feet. He finds a fallen Orc weapon, some kind of crude flamer, and uses it to ignite a group of Gretchen who were trying to attach explosives to his legs. But numbers tell. The Orcs keep coming, endless waves of green flesh and crude weapons, and the Ancient is already damaged, already operating on backup systems and emergency power. A well-placed rocket severs his remaining functional leg at the knee. He crashes to the floor, servos screaming. Still he fights, dragging himself forward with his power fist, crushing any Orc foolish enough to come within reach. Another rocket, this one finding a weak point in his back armor, penetrates deep into his systems. Power fails. Life support begins to fail. Inside the sarcophagus, the Ancient feels his awareness beginning to fade, the connections between his mind and the machine weakening as critical systems go offline. His last thoughts are of his chapter, of brothers long dead. of battles fought in the Emperor's name. Then nothing. Silence. The darkness that is not stasis, but true death. The final rest denied to him for so long. The Orks, seeing their foe finally still, let out a cheer that shakes the facility to its foundations. They've won, against a Hume killbot that would have been worth 3 or 4 mobs in a straight fight. They've won. The celebration lasts for hours. Orks drinking fungus beer and swapping increasingly exaggerated stories about the battle. When they finally get around to looting the yarn, Dreadnought's remains, they find the sarcophagus. Gisgob pries it open with some reluctance. He'd hoped to keep the whole machine intact, to study it, to learn from it. But Gorksmasher's orders were clear. Take it apart, see what makes it work. Inside they find what's left of the ancient. 3,000 years old, reduced to a torso and a head, covered in cybernetic implants and life support connections. Dead now, finally and truly dead. The Orks examine the body with curiosity, but no real understanding. They loot the valuable cybernetics, the neural interface equipment, anything that looks like it might be useful. The body itself they leave, not worth the effort of moving. Over the following days, they dismantle the rest of the Dreadnought, hauling its components back to their camp. The armor plates become material for new defenses. The weapons, damaged as they are, get broken down for parts. The power core, miraculously still functional, gets repurposed to run a series of crude generators that will power their settlement for years. In the end, nothing remains of the ancient except scattered components, his body left to decompose in the ruins of the facility. His story ends as it began 3,000 years ago, forgotten, unmourned, just one more casualty in the endless war. But he died as he lived, fighting, defiant to the last, a warrior of the Emperor. Scenario 2. Captured and corrupted. In this darker timeline, the Ancient does surrender, not out of cowardice, but out of a desperate gamble that he can somehow escape once his systems have rested, once he's had time to observe his captors and identify their weaknesses. It's a calculated risk, the kind of decision a warrior with thousands of years of tactical experience might make when all the obvious options lead to certain death. The Orks secure him, which mostly involves getting a lot of chains and cables and wrapping him up until he resembles a massive mechanical cocoon. They haul him back to their settlement, a ramshackle collection of hovels and workshops built in the ruins of an old imperial settlement. Gisgob immediately claims the Dreadnought as his personal project, and Gorksmasher, recognizing that only the mech boy has any chance of understanding the Hume technology, agrees. What follows is weeks, then months, of intensive tinkering. Gisgob approaches the problem with the single-minded determination that only a mech boy can muster. He tears apart sections of the Dreadnought's systems, trying to understand how they work. He makes repairs, crude but surprisingly effective, to the worst of the battle damage. He experiments with different configurations, different connections, trying to find a way to override the machine spirit and bend it to Orkish control. Most of his attempts fail. The Dreadnought systems are designed to resist exactly this kind of tampering, protected by layers of security protocols and blessed by tech priests specifically to prevent corruption by chaos or Xenos influences. But Gisgob is persistent, and he has one advantage that few others would possess: the WAG field. Every time Gisgob makes an adjustment that should fail, the ambient psychic energy of the Ork settlement smooths over the impossibilities, makes the improbable just barely possible. A connection that should reject the input instead accepts it. A security protocol that should lock down the systems instead glitches and allows access. Slowly, incrementally, Gisgob begins to get results. Inside the sarcophagus, the Ancient is aware of all of this. He can feel the mech boy's tinkering, feel his systems being altered in ways that horrify him. He tries to resist, tries to assert control over his own chassis, but his power reserves are depleted, and the Orks have learned to keep him in a state of semi-consciousness, where he's aware but unable to fully activate his combat systems. The process is a kind of torture, psychological rather than physical. To be helpless while your body, such as it is violated by Xenos hands. To feel your systems being corrupted, turned against their original purpose. To know that you're being transformed into a weapon that will fight for the enemies of mankind. It's a nightmare that the Ancient couldn't have imagined even in his darkest moments. But Gizgob succeeds. After months of work, after countless failures and a few explosions that nearly killed him, he finally cracks the Dreadnought's control systems. It's not a clean hack, not a complete override. The Ancient's consciousness is still present, still aware, but Gizgob has installed his own control systems, crude Orkish devices that can, with enough belief and enough Orks nearby to power the Wah! Field, force the Dreadnought to respond to commands. The first test is simple. Gorksmasher orders the Dreadnought to take a step forward. Inside the sarcophagus, the Ancient tries to resist, tries to keep his leg locked in place, but the Orkish controls engage, overriding his intentions, and his leg moves. One step, then another. The warboss laughs with delight. Over the following weeks, the Orks train with their new weapon, learning its capabilities, learning how to command it effectively. They repaint it in Orkish colors, green and black with crude glyphs, proclaiming it as property of Gorksmasher's warband. They attach additional weapons, Orkish guns bolted onto the chassis, in defiance of all aesthetic and engineering principles, but functioning well enough. They cover it in trophies, bits of defeated enemies hanging from chains. The Ancient is still present through all of this, still conscious, still aware, still suffering. He's become what every Dreadnought fears most, a puppet, his body controlled by others, his will subverted. The only mercy is that he can sometimes resist, can sometimes sabotage the commands in small ways. A shot that misses by inches when it should have been a direct hit. A step that's slightly off balance, causing the Dreadnought to stumble. Small victories in a war he's already lost. The warband uses him in their raids, and the effect is devastating. Enemies who might have stood against Orks alone break and flee when they see a Space Marine Dreadnought fighting alongside the Greenskins. The Dreadnought's weapons, even the crude Orkish additions, are more effective than anything else in the warband's arsenal. The Ancient racks up kills in the dozens, in the hundreds, all of them people he should have been protecting, all of them dying, because he's been turned into a weapon against mankind. This is his fate now. To serve the enemies he spent his life fighting, to kill those he swore to protect, to exist as a corrupted mockery of everything he once stood for. There is no escape, no hope of rescue, no end to the nightmare. Just battle after battle, each one eroding a little more of his sanity, until eventually nothing remains but the machine and the distant echo of what once was a man. It's a fate worse than death, and the Ancient knows it. But there's nothing he can do except endure and hope that someday, somehow, the nightmare will end. Scenario 3. Mutual destruction. In this version, the battle in the facility doesn't end with either side clearly victorious. Instead, it escalates into a mutual destruction that consumes both the Ancient and the Ork warband. It starts when Gizgob, in a desperate attempt to stop the Ancient's rampage, begins overloading the facility's power systems. His plan is simple. If he can cause a big enough explosion, it might destroy the Dreadnought while the Orks escape. It's not a good plan, but it's the best he can come up with under pressure while being shot at. What Gizgob doesn't understand is that the facility's power systems are connected to the plasma coils that have been running continuously for 3,000 years. These coils are incredibly stable under normal operation, designed to provide power for millennia without maintenance. But if they're deliberately overloaded, if their safety systems are bypassed, They become bombs of almost unimaginable destructive potential. The Ancient's sensors detect the power spike immediately. His tactical assessment systems, running calculations even in the midst of battle, immediately recognize what's happening and what it means. The facility is going to explode. He has perhaps 5 minutes before the plasma coils reach critical mass and detonate with enough force to vaporize everything within a kilometer radius. He should run. His survival instinct, what little of it remains after 3,000 years, screams at him to flee, to get as far from the facility as possible before the explosion. But where would he go? His systems are damaged beyond his ability to repair without proper facilities and tech priests. The planet is a wilderness, no Imperial presence, no way to contact his chapter even if they still exist. He's already dead, just taking a while to get there, but he can take the Orks with him. The Ancient changes his tactics. Instead of trying to kill Orks, he starts trying to keep them in the facility. He positions himself near the main entrance, cutting off the escape route. He fires at Orks, who try to flee through secondary exits, driving them back. His Vox speakers begin broadcasting Orkish curses that he's learned over his long service, taunting them, challenging them, using their own cultural psychology against them. Orks don't like running from a fight. They especially don't like it when the enemy is insulting their courage while doing it. The warband, instead of fleeing while they have the chance, redirects its attention to the Dreadnought blocking their exit. If they want out, they have to go through him. The battle becomes a meat grinder. Orks throw themselves at the Ancient with reckless abandon, dying by the dozen but keeping him pinned in place. The Ancient meets them with all the fury of a warrior who knows he's about to die and is determined to make it count. He fights not for victory, but for time, for those precious minutes until the plasma coils reach critical mass. Gizgob realizes what's happening and tries to abort the overload, tries to shut down the systems before they explode. But he's already done too much damage, bypassed too many safety systems, and the cascade is beyond his ability to stop. The power readings continue to climb, the systems continuing to build toward inevitable detonation. Gorksmasha, finally understanding that something has gone catastrophically wrong, orders a retreat. But it's too late. The Orks are committed to the fight, packed into the facility's corridors, and the Ancient is holding the main exit. They could try to fight through him, but that would take time they don't have. They could try the secondary exits, but many of those are already blocked by debris from the battle. The Ancient systems count down the seconds. 3 minutes. 2. 1. He stops fighting, lowers his weapons, and activates his external Vox speakers one last time. "For the Emperor," he says, his synthesized voice echoing through the corridors. It's the first time he's spoken since awakening, the first time he's used his voice for anything other than combat commands. The words are a benediction, a prayer, a final declaration of loyalty before the end. Then the plasma coils reach critical mass and detonate. The explosion is visible from orbit, a flash of blue-white light that momentarily outshines the system's dying star. The shockwave radiates outward at supersonic speeds, vaporizing the facility and everything in it. The Ancient, the Orks, 3,000 years of history, all of it reduced to component atoms in a fraction of a second. The mountain above the facility cracks and collapses, burying what little remains under millions of tons of rock. The Ork settlement, several kilometers away, feels the blast as a tremendous earthquake. Structures collapse, fires break out. The few Orks who stayed behind, the young, the injured, the ones tasked with guarding the camp, stumble out of their shelters to see a mushroom cloud rising into the sky where their war boss and most of their warband had gone. They wait for survivors. Days pass. No one returns. Eventually, they have to accept the truth. The warband is gone. Gorksmasha is dead. Gizgob is dead. All the best fighters, all the biggest Orks, all the ones who made the decisions and gave the orders, they're all dead. Without leadership, the remaining Orks fragment. Small groups form around the largest survivors, but there aren't enough of them to maintain cohesion. Within weeks, they've scattered across the planet, pursuing their own interests, no longer a unified force. Over time, some will die. Others will grow, feeding on the warfare between groups, eventually becoming war bosses themselves and starting the cycle anew. But that's years away, maybe decades. For now, the planet is quiet, and deep beneath the rubble of the collapsed mountain, in a crater that glows faintly with residual radiation, there's nothing left of the ancient except scattered atoms mixed with orc remains and vaporized stone. No gene seed to recover, no body to inter with honors, no memorial to mark where he fell, just the slow decay of radioactive isotopes and the wind whistling through the ruins. It's not the glorious death a space marine might hope for. No songs will be sung of this final battle, but in a universe that offers few good endings, perhaps it's not the worst fate either. The ancient died as he lived, fighting the enemies of mankind, taking as many of them with him as he could manage. And in the end, isn't that what every space marine is trained to do? Scenario 4. The absurd victory. The final scenario is the most unlikely, the most absurd, and yet in the grim darkness of the far future, perhaps not entirely impossible. This is the timeline where the Orks actually succeed in capturing and controlling the Dreadnought, where Gizgob's mad tinkering bears fruit, where the Wah field accomplishes something that should be absolutely impossible. The Ancient surrenders, as in Scenario 2, but events play out differently. Gizgob, working with an enthusiasm that borders on obsession, doesn't try to override the Dreadnought's control systems. Instead, he tries something much stranger. He tries to communicate with it. It starts almost by accident. Gizgob is working on the Dreadnought's Vox systems, trying to understand how they translate neural impulses into audible speech. He accidentally triggers the external speakers, and the Ancient's voice booms out across the workshop, a litany of curses in High Gothic that would make a tech priest blush. Gizgob is delighted. "Oi, you can talk. That's brilliant, that is. Say something else." The Ancient, surprised to find his Vox systems functional, considers his options. He could curse at the mech boy again. He could refuse to speak, maintaining silence as a form of resistance. Or he could do something he's never considered before. He could talk to the Xenos, not to bargain, not to surrender, but simply to understand. "Why?" he asks, his synthesized voice grinding out the word like broken machinery. "Do you want to activate me? Why not simply scavenge my components?" Gizgob scratches his head, considering the question with surprising seriousness. "'Cause you're interesting, innit? I seen lots of Yumi tech before, looted loads of it, but this is proper old. This is from before, like, from when Yumis knew how to make really good stuff. I want to understand it, want to learn from it, want to make me own stuff better." It's such an honest answer, so devoid of malice or cruelty, that the Ancient finds himself momentarily at a loss for words. He's spent his entire existence, both before and after internment, fighting Orks. He's killed hundreds of them, maybe thousands, but he's never really talked to one, never considered them as anything other than targets to be eliminated. "You're a mech boy," the Ancient says, not a question, but a statement. "Yeah, one of the best I am. Well, maybe not the best, but pretty good. Better than most, anyway." "Then you understand technology. You understand the principles of engineering, of cause and effect." "Course I do. Well, I mean, not like what you Yumis understand it. I just know what goes where and how to make it work. It's in me head, like, always has been." The Ancient processes this information, his tactical mind turning it over, examining it from different angles. An idea begins to form, so ludicrous that he almost dismisses it immediately. But desperation breeds creativity, and he's more desperate than he's ever been in his long existence. "Gizgob," he says, using the mech boy's name for the first time. "I have a proposition for you." Over the following hours, the Ancient lays out his proposal. He will teach Gizgob about Imperial technology, explain the principles behind the systems, help the mech boy understand not just what goes where, but why it goes there. In exchange, Gizgob will repair him, restore his systems to functionality, and allow him to leave once the repairs are complete. It's an insane proposal, trading knowledge with a Xenos, teaching an Ork about Imperial engineering, violating every oath he's ever taken. But the alternative is to remain here, damaged and helpless, until his systems finally fail and he dies. And there's a part of him, a part he's not entirely comfortable acknowledging, that's curious to see if this will actually work. Gizgob agrees immediately, not seeing the potential danger in the arrangement, just excited about the prospect of learning new things. They begin that very day, the ancient explaining basic principles of power distribution, while Gizgob works on repairing damaged conduits. The process is frustrating for both of them. The ancient has to simplify his explanations, stripping away the technical jargon and the religious ceremony that normally accompanies any interaction with Imperial technology. Gizgob has to fight his instincts, which tell him just to hit things until they work, and actually try to understand the underlying principles. But slowly, incrementally, they make progress. Gizgob's repairs become more sophisticated, more precise. He starts to understand why certain components are arranged in certain ways, why certain safety systems exist, why certain tolerances matter. And the ancient, despite himself, begins to develop something approaching respect for the mech boy's natural aptitude for engineering. Weeks turn into months. The ancient systems gradually come back online, repaired by Orkish hands, guided by Space Marine knowledge. His assault cannon is rebuilt, though some of the parts are decidedly non-standard. His power fist is restored to full functionality, though it now makes a slightly different sound when activated. His armor is patched with plates that don't quite match the original color scheme, but are functionally identical. During this time, the ancient learns about Ork society, about the clans and their different philosophies, about the WAG and what drives Orks to fight. He learns about Gizgob's history, how he became a mech boy, what drives him to tinker with technology, and Gizgob learns about the Imperium, about Space Marines and their role in protecting humanity, about the Ancients chapter and what happened to it. It's the strangest relationship in the galaxy. A Space Marine Dreadnought and an Ork mech boy working together in a workshop built from scrap, teaching each other about their respective cultures and technologies. If anyone from either the Imperium or other Ork warbands knew about it, both of them would probably be executed immediately. But on this forgotten world, in this moment, it works. Finally, after 3 months of work, the ancient systems are fully restored. He runs a complete diagnostic and finds, to his surprise, that he's actually in better condition than he was before the battle in the vault. Gizgob's repairs, guided by the ancient's explanations, have been remarkably effective. The ancient stands in the workshop, testing his newly repaired systems, and faces a decision. He made a deal with Gizgob. The mech boy upheld his end, repairing the ancient systems with surprising skill and dedication. The ancient should uphold his end, should leave as promised, should walk away from this strange interlude and try to find some way off this world. But there's a problem. Over the months of working together, of teaching and learning, of sharing stories and knowledge, something unexpected has happened. The ancient has come to view Gizgob not as a Xenos to be exterminated, but as, well, if not quite a friend, then at least a colleague. Someone he respects, someone he owes a debt to. And Gorksmasher, who's been watching this whole arrangement with increasing suspicion and decreasing patience, has decided that he's done waiting. If the ancient won't work for the warband voluntarily, then he'll be forced to. Gorksmasher has been gathering more Orks, preparing for a confrontation, and that confrontation is about to happen. The workshop doors slam open, and Gorksmasher enters with a mob of his biggest knobs. "Right den," the war boss announces. "Time's up. I've been patient. Let Gizgob do his thing. But now Dayumi works for us, or Dayumi gets scrapped. Simple as." Gizgob steps between the war boss and the ancient. "Now hang on, boss. We had a deal. I fix him up. He teaches me stuff, then he leaves. That was the arrangement." "I don't care about arrangements," Gorksmasher growls. I care about having the biggest, baddest warband in this sector, and that means having a Dreadnought on our side. So he stays, or he gets crumped. Your choice, Gizgob. The Ancient's tactical systems immediately begin analyzing the situation. 20 Orks between him and the exit. Gorks Masha himself is a formidable opponent. Possible casualties if he fights? High. Possible chance of escape? Low. Possible chance of survival if he submits? Very low. They'll just enslave him, as in Scenario 2. But there's another option. One that violates every protocol, every oath, every principle he's supposed to uphold. One that would get him declared a traitor if his chapter still existed to do so. One that's completely, utterly insane. He could fight alongside the Orks. Not for them. Not as their slave or their weapon. But alongside them. As an independent contractor of sorts. He could protect Gizgob, who despite being a Xenos, has shown him more consideration and respect than anyone has in 3,000 years. He could use the Warband's resources to try to get off this planet, to find his way back to the Imperium, to discover what became of his chapter. It's a betrayal of everything he stands for. It's collaboration with the enemy. It's heresy of the highest order. And yet, in this moment, it's the only path forward that doesn't end in death or enslavement. The Ancient makes his decision. He steps forward, placing himself beside Gizgob, facing Gorks Masha. The mech boy and I have a working relationship, he says, his vox speakers making the words echo through the workshop. I will not become your slave, but I propose an alternative. I will provide tactical advice and combat support to your warband. In exchange, Gizgob continues to maintain my systems, and I am free to leave if I choose. Gorks Masha's eyes narrow. You think you can make demands? You think you got a choice? I think, the Ancient replies, powering up his assault cannon for emphasis, that I'm worth more to you alive and cooperative than dead or enslaved. I think Gizgob is the only mech boy in this warband skilled enough to maintain my systems. And I think if you try to take me by force, you'll lose at least half your knobs before you succeed. The choice, War Boss, is yours. The standoff lasts for several long moments, neither side willing to back down. Then Gorks Masha does something that surprises everyone. He laughs, a huge, booming laugh that shakes the walls of the workshop. I like you, Yumi. You got guts. Right then, we'll do it your way. You work with us, not for us. But if you betray us, if you try anything sneaky, I'll personally tear you apart and use your bits to decorate me trophy rack. We got a deal? The Ancient considers refusing, considers fighting anyway, considers the fact that agreeing to this makes him something he never thought he'd become. Then he thinks about Gizgob standing beside him, ready to defend him against his own war boss. He thinks about the alternative outcomes, all of which end badly. We have a deal, he says. And so begins the strangest chapter in the Ancient's long existence. He becomes, in effect, a mercenary dreadnought working with an Ork warband. He provides tactical advice for their raids, though he insists they avoid Imperial targets when possible. He fights alongside them against other Ork warbands, against Chaos cultists, against the occasional Tyrannid splinter fleet that wanders through the system. The arrangement is never comfortable. The Ancient never stops being a space marine, never stops believing in the Imperium and the Emperor. He simply compartmentalizes, telling himself that this is a temporary expedient, a necessary compromise to survive until he can find his way home. The Orks never fully trust him, always keeping one eye on the big Yumi in case he decides to turn on them. But it works, after a fashion. The warband becomes unusually successful, its raids more effective, its victories more decisive. Word spreads of Gorks Masha's pet Yumi, and other warbands begin to seek them out, some looking to challenge them, others wanting to join up with such a clearly blessed warband. Gizgob becomes the second most important Ork in the warband, valued for his ability to maintain the Ancient systems and for the knowledge he's acquired through their continued collaboration. He builds new weapons and vehicles, incorporating principles the ancient has taught him, creating technology that's more sophisticated than typical Orkish work, while still maintaining that essential Orkish aesthetic. And the ancient endures. He fights when he must. He provides counsel when asked. He maintains his humanity, his identity as a space marine, even as he works alongside the enemies he once fought without question. He tells himself it's temporary, that someday he'll find a way off this world, back to the Imperium, back to his chapter, if it still exists. Whether he actually believes this, or whether it's just the lie he tells himself to make the collaboration bearable, is something he doesn't examine too closely. In the grim darkness of the far future, sometimes survival requires compromises that would be unthinkable in more civilized times. And sometimes the line between pragmatism and treason becomes too blurred to distinguish. The broader implications, what this tells us about the 40k universe. Each of these scenarios, absurd, as some of them may seem, tells us something important about the nature of the Warhammer 40,000 universe and the factions that inhabit it. The first scenario, the Ancients' Last Stand, exemplifies the Imperium's core philosophy. Better death than dishonor. Better to fall in battle than to compromise with the enemy. It's a philosophy that has kept the Imperium fighting for 10,000 years, that has allowed humanity to survive in a hostile galaxy through sheer, bloody-minded determination. But it's also a philosophy that creates tragedies like the Ancient, warriors who give everything in service to an empire that forgets they ever existed. The second scenario, the corrupted Dreadnought, represents one of the Imperium's greatest fears, that their technology, their weapons, their very warriors might be turned against them. It's why the Adeptus Mechanicus guards their knowledge so jealously, why tech priests perform elaborate rituals over every piece of equipment, why security protocols and fail-safes are built into every system. The idea that an Ork could corrupt a Dreadnought, could turn a space marine into a weapon against humanity, is a nightmare that keeps Inquisitors awake at night. The third scenario, mutual destruction, shows us that sometimes in the grim darkness of the far future, there are no winners, only different flavors of losing. The Ancient achieves a kind of victory by taking his enemies with him, but it's a hollow victory that leaves nothing but ruins and radiation. It's the kind of ending that happens countless times across the galaxy. Small tragedies that don't change the course of history, but accumulate into the general background of suffering that defines the setting. And the fourth scenario, the absurd collaboration, challenges our assumptions about the fundamental nature of the conflict between the Imperium and Xenos races. We're told that there can be no peace, no cooperation, no common ground between humanity and the alien. But what if that's not entirely true? What if, in the right circumstances, with the right individuals, some kind of working relationship is possible? It's a dangerous idea, one that the Imperium would denounce as heresy, but it's also one that hints at possibilities the setting rarely explores. The Orks themselves are crucial to understanding why any of these scenarios could happen. They're not simply monsters to be exterminated, though they're certainly that from the Imperium's perspective. They're a race with their own culture, their own values, their own way of understanding the universe. They loot not just out of necessity, but because it's a fundamental part of how they interact with technology and the world around them. They fight not because they're evil, but because fighting is literally what they were designed to do. The mech boys are particularly interesting in this context. They represent the intersection of instinct and innovation, of genetic programming and individual creativity. A mech boy, like Gizgob, doesn't understand technology the way a tech priest does, but his understanding is no less valid for being different. He can look at a piece of equipment and know, without being able to explain how he knows, exactly what it does and how to modify it. This intuitive approach to engineering often produces results that seem impossible to those raised in more rigid traditions. The Wah field adds another layer of complexity. It's easy to dismiss Ork technology as working because they believe it works, but the reality is more nuanced. Ork technology is functional, built on genuine engineering principles. The WAG field just makes it a little more functional than it has any right to be, filling in the gaps, smoothing over the rough edges, making the improbable possible. It's the difference between a gun that jams every third shot and one that fires reliably, between an engine that should seize up and one that keeps running. This is why Orks discovering a Dreadnought is such a compelling scenario. It pits Orkish ingenuity and enthusiasm against Imperial engineering and martial pride. It creates situations where the normal rules don't quite apply, where the expected outcomes aren't guaranteed. A Dreadnought should be able to wipe out an Ork mob without difficulty. But what if the Dreadnought is damaged? What if he's outnumbered by factors of dozens or hundreds? What if the Orks have a mech boy who's just clever enough to be dangerous? And underlying all of this is the tragedy of the Dreadnought's existence. 3,000 years in stasis, awakening to find everything he knew gone, everyone he cared about dead or scattered. It's a fate that should have been prevented, that would have been prevented if the galaxy was even slightly less cruel. But the galaxy is not kind, and warriors like the Ancient pay the price for its indifference. The Imperial response. What happens if this is discovered? Let's consider what would happen if word of any of these scenarios reached Imperial authorities. In the first scenario, where the Ancient dies fighting, there's nothing to discover. The explosion destroys all evidence, and the Imperium, busy with a million other crises, never learns that one of their dreadnoughts awakened and fell on a backwater world 3,000 years after being left behind. But in the other scenarios, particularly the fourth one, where the Ancient is working with Orks, the implications are profound and disturbing. If an Inquisitor were to learn of a Space Marine dreadnought cooperating with Xenos, the response would be immediate and overwhelming. First, a kill team would be dispatched to eliminate the Ancient and any Orks who knew about the arrangement. The Ancient warrior would be declared tainted, corrupted by prolonged exposure to Xenos influence. The fact that he maintained his loyalty to the Emperor, that he never truly submitted to the Orks, would be irrelevant. The mere fact of cooperation would be enough to condemn him. Second, the Inquisition would investigate to determine if this represented a broader pattern. Was the Ancient's chapter still extant? If so, they would be subjected to intense scrutiny. Were there other instances of Space Marines cooperating with Xenos? The Inquisition would want to know, would dig through records going back centuries, looking for any hint of similar compromises. Third, the knowledge itself would be suppressed. Any Imperial citizens who learned of the Ancient's cooperation would be mind-wiped or executed, depending on the Inquisitor's disposition. The very idea that a Space Marine could work with Orks, even temporarily, even under duress, is dangerous. It suggests that the absolute divide between humanity and Xenos might not be so absolute after all. It raises questions that the Imperium cannot afford to have asked. If the Ancient's original chapter still existed, they would be horrified by the revelation. Space Marine chapters take their honor extremely seriously, and the suggestion that one of their Ancients, a warrior who should embody their highest ideals, cooperated with Xenos would be devastating. They would almost certainly disavow him, strike his name from their records, declare him a traitor to everything the chapter stands for. But there might be a very few, who would understand, who would recognize that the Ancient was placed in an impossible situation, that he made the best choice available in circumstances that offered no good options. These Marines wouldn't defend him publicly, couldn't defend him without risking their own positions, but they might privately acknowledge that they don't know what they would have done in his place. The Adeptus Mechanicus would have their own concerns. The fact that an Ork mech boy learned to repair a dreadnought, that he gained understanding of Imperial technology through direct instruction from a Space Marine, represents a security breach of the highest order. Tech priests would be dispatched to ensure that the knowledge didn't spread, to eliminate any Orks who might have acquired understanding they shouldn't possess. Interestingly, this might be one area where the interests of the Imperium and the Orks actually align. Most Ork war bosses, if they learned that one of their mech boys was cooperating with a Humi, would view it with deep suspicion. Orks are supposed to fight humies, not work with them. The fact that the arrangement was successful wouldn't matter. It would be seen as un-Orky, which in Ork society is one of the worst things you can be. Gizgob would likely be challenged by other mech boys jealous of his success and suspicious of his methods. He'd probably win those challenges, the knowledge he'd gained from the Ancient making him genuinely superior to his competitors. But the challenges would keep coming. Eventually, he'd likely have to choose between continuing his work with the Ancient and maintaining his position in Ork society. The Ancient's internal struggle, identity and compromise. Perhaps the most interesting aspect of any scenario where the Ancient survives is the internal psychological struggle he would face. For his entire existence, both as a flesh and blood space marine and as a dreadnought, his identity has been built on certain fundamental principles. He serves the Emperor. He protects humanity. He destroys the enemies of mankind. These aren't just beliefs, they're the core of who he is. Working with Orks, even temporarily, even out of necessity, challenges that identity at the deepest level. Every time he provides tactical advice that helps the warband succeed, every time he fights alongside greenskins against a mutual enemy, every time he teaches Gizgob something about Imperial technology, he's violating principles he's held for thousands of years. The Ancient would likely engage in extensive rationalization to maintain his sense of self. He'd tell himself that this is temporary, that he's gathering intelligence on Ork operations, that he's positioning himself to eventually escape and rejoin the Imperium. He'd emphasize the times when he insists on avoiding Imperial targets, when he steers the warband away from human settlements. He'd focus on the occasions when his intervention prevents the Orks from doing something particularly destructive. But rationalization only goes so far. In his quiet moments, when the warband is sleeping and he's standing watch, when he has nothing to do but think, the doubt would creep in. Has he betrayed everything he stood for? Is he still a space marine, or has he become something else, something new? If his battle brothers could see him now, fighting alongside Orks, would they recognize him as one of their own? These questions don't have easy answers. The Ancient exists in a moral grey area that the Imperium officially denies exists. He's not a traitor, he hasn't pledged allegiance to chaos or renounced the Emperor, but he's not exactly loyal either. Not in the way the Imperium defines loyalty. He's something in between, and the Imperium doesn't have a category for that. This internal struggle would manifest in small ways. He might insist on performing his daily devotionals, even though there's no one to hear them but himself and the Orks. He might keep a mental record of every Ork life saved by his intervention, every human death prevented, tallying them against the compromises he's made. He might spend hours reviewing his chapter's teachings, looking for precedent or guidance for his situation, and finding none. Gizgob, in his own way, would recognize this struggle, even if he doesn't fully understand it. He'd see the Ancient's hesitation before certain battles, the way he sometimes seems to be arguing with himself in words too quiet for the mech boy to hear. Gizgob might even try to help in his crude, orcish way, perhaps by reminding the Ancient that he's kept his side of their bargain, that he's remained true to his word even when circumstances changed. The relationship between the Ancient and Gizgob would likely deepen over time, evolving from simple pragmatic cooperation into something more complex. Not friendship exactly, the cultural gap is too wide for that, but perhaps mutual respect, an acknowledgement that despite their differences, they've both shown integrity in keeping their commitments to each other. The technological exchange, what the Ancient teaches, what he learns. If we follow the scenario where the Ancient and Gizgob continue working together, the technological exchange between them becomes fascinating to consider. What would a Space Marine Dreadnought teach an Ork mech boy? What could an Ork mech boy teach a Space Marine? The Ancient's instruction would likely focus on principles rather than specifics. He couldn't teach Gizgob to build a bolter. The manufacturing processes are too complex and require resources the Orks don't have access to. But he could explain why bolters are designed the way they are. The mass reactive rounds for maximum damage, the reliable firing mechanism, the balance between power and portability. More importantly, he could teach concepts. The importance of redundancy in critical systems, the value of standardization for maintenance and repair, the principles of power distribution and energy management. These are things that mech boys understand intuitively, but rarely think about explicitly, and having them explained in systematic terms would elevate Gizgob's work to a new level. Gizgob, in turn, would teach the Ancient about adaptive improvisation. Imperial technology is magnificent when it works, but it's often inflexible, designed to operate within specific parameters and prone to failure when those parameters aren't met. Ork technology is crude but adaptable, capable of being modified on the fly to meet changing circumstances. The Ancient might learn to see value in approaches he previously dismissed as primitive. That crude patch job using scavenged materials actually distributes stress more evenly than the proper repair would have. That seemingly random arrangement of components actually improves efficiency by reducing energy loss. That weapon that looks like it was assembled by a blind Gretchen in the dark actually has a self-correcting firing mechanism that compensates for targeting drift. The Wah field would be particularly interesting for the Ancient to study, insofar as he could study something fundamentally psychic. He might come to understand it not as Ork technology works because they believe it works, but as Ork technology is designed to interface with their psychic field, making it more effective than it would otherwise be. It's a subtle distinction, but an important one. Over time, the Ancient's approach to technology might shift slightly. He'd never abandon the cult mechanicus teachings entirely, but he might become more willing to improvise, more accepting of solutions that work, even if they're not orthodox. His repairs to his own systems, guided by Gizgob's hands, but informed by his own knowledge, might incorporate elements that no tech priest would approve of, but that function perfectly well nonetheless. This technological hybrid, part imperial precision and part orcish improvisation, would be utterly unique in the galaxy. If it could be studied, if the principles could be extracted and applied more broadly, it might represent a genuine advancement in understanding how to merge different technological philosophies. But of course, it can never be studied, because both the Imperium and mainstream Ork society would reject it as heretical or un-Orky, respectively. The Forgotten Warrior, themes of memory and loss. Underlying all of these scenarios is a fundamental theme of the Warhammer 40,000 universe, the tragedy of the Forgotten Warrior. The Ancient was left behind not through malice, but through the chaos of war, lost in the shuffle of evacuation or defeat. For 3,000 years he slept, and in that time the galaxy moved on without him. His chapter, if it survived at all, has changed beyond recognition. The battle brothers he knew are dead 1,000 times over. The enemies he fought are extinct or evolved into new threats. The very tactics and strategies he mastered might be obsolete, replaced by new doctrines adapted to new challenges. He's a relic from another age, awakened into a galaxy that has no place for him. This is the fate that haunts every Dreadnought, though most only experience it in smaller doses. They sleep for decades or centuries, and wake to find comrades gone, circumstances changed. But the Ancient has experienced it on a scale that few others have, a gap so vast that it fundamentally disconnects him from the present. What makes this particularly poignant is that the Ancient did everything right. He served faithfully, he fought bravely, he accepted internment in a Dreadnought when his body was destroyed, choosing continued service over the peace of death. He did everything the Imperium asked of him, and his reward was to be forgotten, left to sleep in a vault that no one remembered existed until Orks stumbled across him by accident. It's a reminder that in the grim darkness of the far future, nobility and honor offer no protection against the fundamental indifference of the universe. The Ancient could have been the greatest warrior who ever lived, and it wouldn't have mattered. He still would have been left behind, still would have slept for 3 millennia, still would have awakened to find himself alone in a galaxy that doesn't remember his name. This theme resonates throughout the Warhammer 40,000 setting. The Imperium is full of forgotten heroes, warriors who gave everything in service to an empire too vast to remember them all. They're buried in unmarked graves on a million worlds. They're entombed in damaged dreadnoughts in fortress monasteries that no one visits anymore. They're lost in warp storms or scattered across time by the vagaries of interstellar travel. They served, they sacrificed, and they were forgotten. The Ancient's awakening by Orks adds an additional layer of cruelty to this tragedy. Not only was he forgotten, but his rediscovery comes not from his own people, but from the enemies he spent his life fighting. There's a terrible irony in being rescued, if you can call it that, by the very beings you dedicated yourself to destroying. It's the universe's final insult to a warrior who deserved better. Conclusion. The story matters because the universe is cruel. So what happens when Orks find a dreadnought that's been asleep for 3,000 years? As we've seen, it depends on countless variables: the condition of the dreadnought, the nature of the Orks who find him, the choices made in critical moments, and the sheer random chance that governs all events in a chaotic universe. He might die fighting, taking as many Orks with him as possible in a final blaze of glory that no one will witness or remember. He might be captured and corrupted, turned into a weapon against the very people he swore to protect. He might destroy himself and his enemies in a cataclysmic explosion that leaves nothing but ruins and radiation. Or, in the most unlikely scenario, he might find a way to survive through cooperation with his enemies, compromising his principles to preserve his existence. Each of these outcomes tells us something about the Warhammer 40,000 universe and the forces that shape it. About duty and pragmatism, about honor and survival, about the terrible prices paid by those who serve and the universe's indifference to their sacrifices, about the possibility, however slim, of finding common ground even between the most unlikely of allies. But perhaps the most important thing these scenarios tell us is that in the grim darkness of the far future, individual lives matter, even when the universe insists they don't. The Ancient is just one warrior among trillions. His story, whatever form it takes, won't change the course of galactic history. The Great Crusade will continue or fail regardless of what happens in a forgotten vault on a backwater world. Yet his story matters. It matters because he matters, because every individual who serves and suffers and struggles in this nightmare universe deserves to have their story told. It matters because in a setting defined by vast impersonal forces, by billion-strong armies and planet-killing weapons, we need reminders that those forces are ultimately made up of individuals, each with their own hopes and fears and choices. The Ancient's 3,000-year sleep and violent awakening is a tragedy, but it's a tragedy that illuminates something important about the human condition, about the price of duty, about the cost of survival, about the weight of memory, and the pain of loss. It's a tragedy that reminds us why we tell stories about this brutal, fascinating, terrible universe. In the end, the Ancient's fate is less important than what his story reveals. That even in the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war and the laughter of thirsting gods, individual choices still matter. That honor and pragmatism can sometimes exist in the same soul, creating unbearable tension but also profound complexity. That the line between hero and traitor is sometimes drawn by circumstances beyond our control. That memory is both burden and blessing. That being forgotten is its own special kind of death. The Orks who found the Ancient probably don't understand any of this. They just wanted some loot and found a really good fight instead. And maybe that's fitting too. In a universe where meaning is scarce and suffering is common, sometimes the most profound tragedies are witnessed only by those too simple to recognize them as such. So if you ever find yourself on a forgotten world, exploring ancient ruins left behind by battles fought long ago. Be careful what vaults you open. Be cautious about what sleeping giants you wake. Because in the Warhammer 40,000 universe, the past is never really dead. It's just sleeping, waiting for some unlucky soul to stumble across it and set in motion events that should have remained buried forever. And if you're that unlucky soul, well, make sure you've got a good mech boy handy. You're going to need one. If you enjoyed this deep dive into what happens when unstoppable Xeno's curiosity meets immovable Imperial determination, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more Warhammer 40,000 lore and storytelling. Drop a comment below with your own theories about what you think would happen in this scenario, or suggest other obscure corners of the 40k universe you'd like me to explore. Until next time, stay vigilant, trust in the Emperor, and maybe don't wake up any 3,000-year-old war machines unless you're absolutely sure you can handle the consequences. For the Emperor, and for those who served and were forgotten.